Any comments, questions on the agenda? All right, takes us to our first of our two public comment sections for the evening. We have a very packed agenda and a full list of things to go on to tonight, so I'm going to hold us tight to the time frame on this. I know a lot of people here, a lot of people here for the same thing, so if someone is up there that's going to say something that you agree with, please just raise your hand and agree with them. We don't need to hear the same comment or I agree with them 30 times. All right, so the first person go up.
Wendy Pliska, Fieldcrest Court, Watertown, Wisconsin. You're going to hear a lot of opinions tonight from this very packed house. Opinions are lovely, we all have them. I'm here to just remind you of the law. The Moms for Liberty group that's here has an interesting perspective on the law. I'm going to share with you a couple very easy to read fact-based articles that are from reputable media sources, including the Journal Sentinel. I'm going to pass those down. If by some chance you would like something a little bit more legal, there's a 20-page, thank you, article on case law. I did not think you wanted me to kill that many trees, but if you would like that citation, please email me, you have that. Their claims that the National Moms for Liberty lawsuit prevents schools from enforcing Title IX in regards to transgender students is false. What their case does is that schools that are on the Moms for Liberty list says that parents cannot apply to the U.S. Department of Education to have the Department of Education ask to intervene. What it does do is say that parents will then need to go to the courts to ask the courts to intervene on the part of our students. Now, what those of you who keep up with case law are finding is that the courts are standing up for our children. In the case of earlier this month in Elkhorn, a judge in the state of Wisconsin said that the Elkhorn School District could not prevent a trans student from using the bathroom of her choice. So as you are considering policy, as a taxpayer in the District of Watertown, and as the parent of a trans student, I'm going to ask you to make sure that the policies that you are writing are not going to cost me, a taxpayer, money if we are embroiled in a lawsuit, which we will lose as a school district. So in other words, please do not write policies that the Moms of Liberty force you or bully you into writing, which we will lose in court. Our trans students and our gay students have a right to be in our schools. They have a right not to be bullied, and they have a right to exist and use the bathrooms and the locker rooms of their choice. If you have questions, I have lots of resources for you. Again, as a taxpayer, I know that our legal representatives are expensive. So I offer you my expertise. Please feel free to use it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. George is next.
We're agreeing, sorry.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'm Barb Weiss. I attended one of the strategic planning session meetings. I was impressed with how well it was run. I am extremely disappointed to learn that the board has chosen to ignore the work of the people who attended those meetings. As a retired teacher, I can tell you that attending meetings, putting in the work, only to discover that my input has been ignored is one of the most maddening results for a staff member. Diversity and inclusion are important to several groups within our district. Others will speak on those concerns. I will address two groups that are particularly important to me. Sure School is a bilingual elementary school that celebrates diversity in this district. You might wonder why a white female cisgender would be interested in that. Well, it's because the fact that my daughter became fluent in Spanish probably saved her life. I won't go into details how that particularly happened, but I would discuss it later if someone needed it. Charlotte had 2.5 years of Spanish at WHS before she became an exchange student in Australia. That particular school did not offer Spanish, but there was a student, another exchange student who was from Peru. She had that student promise that he would only speak with her and only allow her to speak with him in Spanish. When she returned a year later, her Spanish teacher at the high school was amazed at how much her Spanish had grown. Her vocabulary had exploded. Her fluency was like a native speaker. That is the gift that the Spanish speakers at SURES bring to the rest of our students. We need to recognize that as a gift. And part of the reason we do that, part of the way that we do that is with our language. And our language in the strategic plan should recognize that diversity. So I ask that that be included in the strategic plan. As a retired special ed teacher, I was appalled that the word inclusion was deleted from the strategic plan. Inclusion is personal to the students who I had the privilege of working with on a daily basis. To these students, inclusion means they are valued as a person and given the same educational opportunities as everyone else. Research has shown that inclusion benefits not only the special education students, but every student in that classroom. I became a special education teacher because of an experience I had as a student also here at WHS. I was a big sister to a teenage resident of Bethesda Lutheran Homes at that time. Looking back, she should have never been in a residential facility. She should have been living in the community. That is a slope, a slippery slope that we should never go down again. And by removing inclusion from the strategic plan, it becomes much easier to not authorize resources that are needed for inclusion. And we need to recognize that those students bring blessings to this district that you cannot imagine. One of the most important lessons of inclusion is that we need to care not only for our own needs, but the needs of others. Is that not one of the most important lessons we want our students to learn? Restore diversity and inclusion to the statements to say to those students and those families, we see you, we value you, and we honor the strengths you bring to this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anyone else?
My name is David Byrne. I'm from Watertown, and my 17-year-old son wanted to come tonight, but he's a 3-sport athlete. He doesn't plan always, and so he's unavailable. He sent me a text here, and he asked me to read it to you. I told him that, well, let me read it first. I don't know if I'm going to read it. I can't promise to you. But this is what it says. It says, "Hi all, my name is Julian Byrne, and I write a quick statement about my great experience in Watertown Public School System and how diversity has played an important role in that. I started out in private school, but later decided to go to Riverside Middle School for a wide range of opportunities and broader education. And that is what it has given me, and what Watertown High School continues to give me. I have been able to pursue things like music, engineering, and a multitude of information from all different subjects. But I wouldn't have been able to do this if it wasn't for the diversity. Diversity in the students, teachers, and staff, in their viewpoints, backgrounds, where they're from, and what they've experienced. Diversity in students has taught me important social skills like empathy. Similarly, diversity in teachers gave me a rounded education instead of one-sided, and gave me the ability to form my own opinion on any matter. My quality of education has been high because I've been able to experience a diverse group of people and ideas here in Watertown. Thank you for your time."
Thank you. All right, that's the first public session. We will have a second public session later on tonight. As I said, we've got a full agenda here. So the next item we have on the list, we have no announcements and recognitions, will be the governance workshop, returning the water.
Good evening. Glad to be here with everybody tonight. And thanks for inviting me. So this evening, we're going to talk about two really critically important issues. And I'm going to give you an overview because we've only got about 30 minutes. But we're going to be talking about public records and open meetings law. And, you know, I love coming and talking to boards about these topics because I think they're so important to the important work you guys do, both to ensure transparency, but also to, you know, make sure that the district and you as individual board members are not subjecting either to unnecessary liability. So in your board packets, you guys have an outline. I'm going to be going through the outline loosely, but I would encourage questions for anybody who has them, because discussion often helps lead to some good answers, questions and answers. So feel free to shout those out as I move through the materials. So we're going to start with the first part with public records law. And I think the takeaway for both public records and open meetings is really one of transparency. There's a presumption of transparency under the law. And not only do we have that through various court decisions, various attorney general decisions, but we also have that expressly stated in the statutes, which you can see there on page 2 of the outline. With regard to a few definitions, I think it's important to understand what an authority is. So I'll point that out. An authority, most of us think of an authority meaning a body or individual who has records in their possession, to typically be the school district itself. But it's important to remember that you as board members are also authorities as individual elected officials. And that you can see that right there in the definition of authority. As far as what a record is, I think here it's important to understand that a record, a public record for the purposes of public records law, is not determined by its format, but by its content, right? So whether it's electronic, whether it's a text message, social media post, whether it's maps, charts, other things that are identified here in the statute, all those things can be public records, and it's really dependent on what the content is. And the content, if it relates to public business and it's something that is maintained, a record that's maintained or created by the district or by a public official on behalf of the district, on behalf of district business, that's going to, for the most part, be considered a public record. And we'll get to in a second how not all public records are necessarily disclosable, but it's important to understand that definition. There are a few things that aren't public records under the public records law. And you see the bottom of page 2, you'll see drafts, notes, preliminary computations, things of that nature. The real question there is whether or not those items are being shared. And if they are being shared, whom they're being shared with. So for instance, a lot of people think, well, if I take notes or I draft, I put together a draft of a document, as long as I label it draft, for instance, it's not going to be considered a public record. And that's not necessarily true. And so we should be conscious as we create records, as we distribute records, if truly the record or the document is something that should not be a public record, it's really something of your personal nature, personal notes, to refresh your own recollection. Perhaps, for instance, administrators might share it with their administrative assistants. Those types of things would not be considered public records. They would be considered drafts. But if you distribute it more broadly for comment or input, oftentimes those things will lose draft status. I won't go through each one of them here, but there's a number of other exceptions to what a public record is, including things that are unrelated to district business. You see they spill over there onto page 3, materials that have limited access due to copyright, etc. A reminder there at the top of page 3 as well, as I said before, it's really about format. So emails, text messages, social networking sites, and posts, all those things can be public records. You also see in the middle of the page there on page 3, the definition of legal custodian. So in addition to being authorities, you're also the legal custodian for your own records as an elected official. And this is important because some districts, you have board members who they might be using private accounts for district business, which is not a best practice. They might be failing to retain some of the records that they are generating, such as text messages or social media posts. And really that's problematic because as the custodian of their own records, they have an obligation to maintain those records. And then in response to public records requests, if there are responsive documents that are in their possession, it really doesn't matter if it's on a private account, a home computer, for instance, a private device. Those are things that could possibly be considered responsive public records depending on the request. So I think that's an area to emphasize because it's an area where a lot of public officials slip up. Also, when your district gets a public records request, it makes it a lot easier for whether it's the IT personnel or whoever is compiling the documents responsive, if everything is done on your district account, for instance. So keeping emails on your district account, or at the very least forwarding those personal emails or personal email accounts, documents that might be related to district business, forwarding them to your district email address. At the bottom of page 3, you see a number of potential issues associated with electronic communications. So just really quick here, there's a few things that oftentimes I see from boards and board members where they fail to control the information flow. And it creates confusion among the public, and it can create confusion with regard to electronic communications and public records as well. So one is members who are creating documents, this is especially pertains to social media, for instance, where it's not clear whether or not they're speaking as a public official or in their individual capacity or on behalf of the entire board. Another issue is mixed messages to the public. So without identifying whether or not you're speaking as an individual, oftentimes there's confusion as to whether or not you're speaking on behalf of the entire board. And that can cause confusion and misunderstanding among the public. So let's talk a little bit about access to records. So again, the presumption is that unless there is a statutory exemption or the public policy balancing test runs in favor of non-disclosure, which we'll talk about in a second, the presumption is one of access to the public records. There are a few limitations that are identified and listed on page 4 of your outline. And so things like pupil records, law enforcement records, trade secrets, employee records and personnel records that you see on page 5. Those are some of the more common ones that you see listed as statutory exemptions. There's also certain information about you as public officials, local public officials that can't be disclosed. So for instance, other than your address, personal information like your personal email address, your personal phone number, social security numbers, credit card numbers, account numbers, things of that nature that you'd expect would be confidential. Those are afforded some privacy under the public records law. I mentioned the public policy balancing test. So when we review requests that come in, we look to see if there's a statutory exemption that might prohibit disclosure. And then if there's any question about whether or not something should be disclosed in response to a public records request, we look at the public policy balancing test. And that test really weighs the interest of the public in disclosure versus the interest of the public in non-disclosure. So notice those are both public interests. Some people think, well, if there's a confidentiality question related to a certain person's reputation or information about a certain individual, that automatically would be afforded some sort of protection from disclosure. And if that falls under one of the statutory exemptions I mentioned, that might be true. But otherwise, you've got to balance, and you've got to balance whether that public interest favors disclosure or not. So a good example is personnel investigations, or even investigations into board member misconduct. I see a lot of that recently. As people are requesting information about board members. And so sometimes you'll see that, there are damning allegations, for instance, against a particular personnel, member of staff or elected official. But the law says that overall, it's likely not going to have a chilling effect on someone who files a complaint to release that complaint and provide that information. And the public interest in disclosure typically outweighs the public interest in non-disclosure, except if there's a health or safety question there. So if releasing that information might result in someone being harmed, again, that public interest might outweigh. But for the most part, the public interest says disclosure is the rule. This you see on the page 6, there's information about retention and access to electronic records. I mentioned before that as elected officials, board members must maintain their own records. And this can be challenging when it comes to, for instance, social media posts or other items that might not be within your full control. And we can talk in greater detail at some other time. I'm happy to provide some guidance on that nuance there in the law, but there are retention requirements. Now, while you have retention requirements, the retention requirements don't necessarily stem from the public records law. You have your own retention schedules that are adopted by the board, by state statute, and you have other requirements by law, but the public records law itself really only has a requirement with regard to the retention of documents or records once a public request is made. And you can see that down at the bottom of page 6, where it talks about maintaining a record until at least 60 days after the date that the request has been denied, or until the records have been provided in response to a request. But other than that, we look at retention schedules, which is a separate area of the law and mostly governed by policy. The final aspect on public records that I want to discuss is enforcement and penalties. I often get asked, what kind of liability does that look like for the district or even for individuals when it comes to public records? Because it's an area that's often disputed. When we talk about public records and open meetings, there's really a lot of gray area, a lot of room for interpretation, which is one of the reasons that the Attorney General has provided such detailed guidance when they're able, because it does leave a lot to dispute on a case-by-case basis. And so one of the questions I get is, well, what if we get it wrong? What if it ends up that someone brings an action and we find that we either didn't disclose the records we were supposed to, or we provided them in a delayed fashion, for instance? First, as far as enforcement, it's important to understand that the mechanism for enforcing the public records law is an action for mandamus. And that simply means that either an individual can ask the court themselves that in this case, the school board or the district provide the requested records, and then they go to court and petition the court to file an order in that regard. Or they can make that same request to the Attorney General or the local DA to do that on their behalf, to file for a mandamus action. Either way, the mandamus action really is saying, okay, authority, whether that's again the district or a particular official, we're going to require that you provide those documents that you're withholding, or we're going to determine that you've delayed unreasonably in your provision of those documents. And so generally that comes with certain damages, attorney's fees, damages of not less than $100, court costs, punitive damages if it's an arbitrary and capricious denial of access, and some of these attach to the individual as well as the district. So certain forfeitures up to $1,000, and you can see at the bottom of page 7, there's even in some circumstances criminal penalties available when there's alteration or falsification of public records that have been requested, or destruction or damage or concealment of public records with an intent to injure or defraud. So just be aware that when a public records request comes in, some are simple and small in scope, others are more complicated, and others require balancing competing interests. And so it's really important that you as board members seek guidance from your administration and assistance in that regard to go through that analysis, oftentimes working with legal counsel to see what is the potential liability, what are our obligations under the law to balance that transparency with some of those other interests we mentioned. But either way, it's whenever you get a public records request as an entity or as an individual, it's important to pay close attention to how to handle it. So before I move on to public or open meetings, rather, are there any questions on the things I covered? I know that was very quick. Sometimes I do workshops that are a full hour on just that topic. But are there any questions on that high level overview? Yes.
So you would say that a board member's First Amendment right is their First Amendment right, as long as they identify that they're speaking on their own behalf, sharing their own opinion, and that they're not taking an official board position or action of the board, and they're not sharing privileged or confidential information, that they have the right to speak to public, to speak to members of their constituency, and or also even media.
Yeah, it's a good question. One I get a lot, especially the last few years, is especially as there's been a lot of hot topics and controversial issues come up before boards. The answer is you don't relinquish your rights as a private citizen just because you're on a board. You do have the opportunity, and I know there's a big, strong desire to be responsive to your constituents, because that's why you were elected. I do think that needs to be balanced with the best practice of what makes the body, as a governing body, the Board of Education, efficient and effective. And some of that does come down to information flow, like I said before. So clarifying that you're not speaking on behalf of the board, not making comments that might undermine the board and its its charge of looking out for the best interest of the district. But certainly you don't lose your right to respond to constituents. It's just really the manner in which you do it, and making clear that you're speaking as an individual that I think are the key components.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Is the community allowed to ask a question?
I don't believe so. No. All right, then I'm gonna move on to open meetings questions. Okay, so that starts at the top of page 8, and really the same concepts, right? We start from a place of transparency. The people have a right to see the government's business at work. Now that, we'll see in a second when we talk about public comment, for instance, and we had a lot of people show up tonight for public comment, that doesn't necessarily mean participation, although often that's the case. But it certainly means that people have a right to come and witness government action as it's being played out. So we look, and again, there's not only is there a presumption of transparency, but the laws expressly are to be liberally construed, and that's right there in the statutes. So what's a governmental body that's subject to the open meetings law? Well, certainly a board, not individual board members, right? Because it has to be a governing body, but subunits as well. Your committees would be governing bodies, and they're subject to that. Certain advisory commissions. Really, it comes down to what authority created the body and what means was used to create the body. And you see at the bottom of page 8, we have a statutory definition of governmental body. And so it talks about boards, commissions, committees, etc., created by constitution, statute, ordinance, rule, or order. So those are the two questions you ask when you're trying to determine, look, is this, maybe it's not the board, that's an obvious one, but is this committee or is this advisory commission we've developed, is this subject to open meetings? Those are the questions you ask. What authority created it and by what means? So a meeting has to have two elements. And if you turn to the top of page 9, you see that those elements are: one, a purpose to engage in governmental business. And that can take many forms. That can be discussion, it can be decision-making, it can be information gathering. And then the second component is numbers. There has to be a number of members of the governing body present such that they can control or determine the course of action that body takes. So you'll see there in the middle of the page under number 2, if 1/2 or more members or quorum of members are present, there's a presumption that that the body has gathered for the purpose of exercising the responsibilities and authority of the body. But there's sometimes when, for instance, you'll see a negative quorum, the definition of the negative quorum. You don't necessarily have to have just a quorum. A negative quorum are those that might be less than a majority, but nevertheless, they have the opportunity or the authority, I should say, at a meeting to address or impact the course that the body takes. So a good example of that is if something before the board requires a supermajority. There's something on the agenda that requires a supermajority and requires a 2/3 vote, and you have 1/3 show up. That could be considered a quorum because they have the opportunity, albeit a negative quorum, to direct the actions or the course of the body. Maybe the most important thing I talk about tonight is under 2C, which is a walking quorum. And this is also another area that a lot of public officials and a lot of districts get into some hot water. So a walking quorum says that, well, no, we might not be gathered as a body, but we're communicating in a way that resembles a gathering and is making decisions as a body without being physically present. So the old example used to be, a game of telephone. You have the board president, for instance, calls somebody up and says, how do you feel about this issue that's coming up before the board? And then they call up the next person, and they call up the next person. And by the end of all those conversations, they understand or have discussed substantively an issue that's coming before the board, even before the board has had a chance to meet in a properly noticed meeting. And that's called a walking quorum. And if you look at the next item, the electronic communication as a meeting, that's really the context we see it in nowadays most often. And the courts haven't addressed this in much detail. The Attorney General has. And the question becomes, when you're looking at whether or not a walking quorum exists from email exchange, is does it look like an in-person conversation? Does it have some of those same elements? And you see them listed here. You know, what's the number of board members involved? Is it a majority? Is it a quorum? Or is it just a one-on-one conversation and it ends there? What are the number of email messages that are going back and forth? What's the time frame? Does it look more like instantaneous messaging such that you're having a conversation? Is it conversational in tone? Or is it something more like old school written correspondence where it's, you know, somebody says something a week later? None of those are determinative by themselves, but certainly that's what a court would look at. And that's what the Attorney General looks at, some of those elements when they're determining if there's an illegal walking quorum taking place. On to page 10, open session. Yes.
Quick question about that. So I mean, I've attended a couple of different workshops on this, and the question always seems to come up. You know, there are many different board sizes throughout the country, throughout the state. Some of them are like 3-member boards, and they have a question about whether or not just contacting another board member about, let's just say, schedule. You know, would that constitute an open forum? That sort of thing.
Yeah, generally not. So really, there's got to be an issue that's would otherwise be within the board's authority. And there is some Attorney General guidance that says discussing for instance, whether or not an agenda item should be put on an agenda rather than substantively discussing the item itself. There's a distinction there. And the former is probably not a violation, while the latter likely would be. So, you know, it's not necessarily communication. So for instance, you know, a lot of districts, I'm sure you do it here, your superintendent probably sends out some updates once in a while, right? And when they do that, they send it to the entire board. And that's why it's so important that the board not press reply all, not start debating these issues, but just the fact that someone's communicating, or even if the board president sends something out and says, you know, hey, here's something for informational purposes. You're really only get in trouble when you're talking about back and forth regarding a substantive issue that's within the jurisdiction of the board. Okay, so page 10, open session. Just like the public meetings law and the presumption there that, or the public records law rather, just as there's a presumption that records are going to be disclosable and open for the public inspection, open session is the rule, right? Closed session is generally only reserved for certain times, and we'll get to those in a moment. But the default is that meetings are open to the public, accessible, right? Held in a place where we're holding it here, right in the district, so that people can show up. We make accommodations if people need accommodations, rather than in a place or time that would be inaccessible to most people. So, you know, most boards are compliant with that, and it's not an issue. But once in a while, if you talk about like board retreats, I have some clients where their boards want to do a retreat. And it may be, you know, out of the boundaries of the district. And the question comes up as to what, you know, whether or not that's acceptable, whether or not they have to post it. And so those are all issues you want to think about accessibility when you're thinking about typically non-traditional board meetings.
Right. So what is the response there on a retreat?
Sure, so it depends. It depends on what it is that you're doing at the retreat. If you have a quorum, however, and that quorum is dealing with issues that are, you know, again, within the jurisdiction of the board, that there could be decisions made based on that, even if you're just gathering information, it's best to post those. And it's best to have those somewhere where it's accessible to the community. Generally within the boundaries of, not always, and that, you know, it's not a requirement that they're within the boundaries, but I think that's generally a good guidepost as to whether or not it's accessible to your constituency.
But steering clear of issues that could come in front of the board as a matter of discussion would be a good point, good something to steer clear of.
Certainly.
It's not like professional development, something like that.
Yeah, and I always err on the side of caution, right? I mean, it's one of the reasons we're doing this in open session tonight, right? You know, a lot of, whenever I do these workshops, I often have board members say, well, can we do this in closed? You know, and the answer is no, right? Unless we meet one of the statutory exemptions we're about to talk about. This, just you guys gathering information and learning about these topics is something that needs to occur in open session, so everyone can see what's going on, they hear the same information you do, and that's why we're doing it open. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, so you'll see page 10, we talk about public comment during open session. Now, there is no requirement that you allow public comment. Now, in practice, you know, because board members want to hear from their constituency, oftentimes boards do that. Most boards do that, but it looks different, right? In some communities, you can get up and you can talk about whatever you want. Other communities, you have to stick to agenda items. Some you have time restraints, and because the law doesn't require that a governmental body have a public comment period, generally, the law has shown deference to how a board wants to handle that and its regulation. Now, you can't regulate speech, for instance, based on its content, right? You can't discriminate on viewpoint. You gotta let people talk, but you can certainly maintain order. You know, you don't have to allow threatening or harassing behavior, anything that disrupts the meeting, those kinds of things. So that's outside of the open meetings law because it doesn't require public comment, but something to keep in mind when you're talking about what speech is appropriate and what authority does the board have to regulate that speech. One thing I do want to mention, though, that's highlighted under D3 on page 10 is that the Attorney General has addressed whether or not open public comment on any topic would be an appropriate place for a board member, somebody sitting in your seats, to raise an issue that's not on the agenda. And the answer from the Attorney General is no, that's not appropriate, because you as board members have access to and an opportunity to influence the agenda in a way that the rest of the public doesn't. Right, so the public may contact you and ask for something on the agenda, but generally policies of school districts will say it's really up to, you know, the board president in consultation with the superintendent, or, you know, perhaps a board member can request it. But I've never seen a policy that allows a member of the public to do it. So the lesson there is, because you have the ability to impact that agenda, you shouldn't be raising issues that aren't on the agenda as a board member in a open public comment forum. The Attorney General says that would not be a proper use of that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about closed session. Like I said, closed session, there are statutory exemptions. It must, unlike the public records law where you have a balancing test, there's no balancing test for open meetings law. It has to, your topic of discussion has to fall under one of these exemptions in order, one of these statutory exemptions, in order to be a proper closed session. So, you know, generally post the closed session, you can see the requirements right here on page 11. You post the closed session, you know, you announce why you're going into closed session, you vote on it. You have to take all of those actions in open session. You always have to start an open session to do those requirements in order to come into a properly constituted closed session meeting. And there's a few reasons you can do that. They're listed here under 3C at the bottom of page 11. So one is when you as a board are acting in a judicial or quasi-judicial function, right? There's some things, for instance, if you're discussing, if you're dealing with a grievance procedure, or you're dealing with an expulsion, right? Where you are sitting as the judges, for lack of a better term, that you're serving that judicial or quasi-judicial function. That would be a time when you could be in closed session for deliberations concerning that case. Now, that's not to say that all those things are necessarily in closed session as far as the hearing, although student expulsions, of course, would be, but it does mean that you can deliberate in a closed session. Discipline and discharge of personnel, that's one of the exemptions. Compensation and evaluation of personnel as well. The key takeaway here is that it's not just, for instance, take compensation. You can't just talk about larger issues like compensation structure, right, or supplemental compensation in closed session. It has to be specific to certain employees, and you're discussing their compensation specifically. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether or not that can be a small group of employees, one category, especially when those employees might be personally identifiable by addressing their compensation. And, but overall, the thing to remember is that you should have someone in mind or some group of employees in mind rather than an overall discussion about compensation. Another area that sees compensation.
Quick, Brian.
Yeah.
Hey, to that specific point, I'm trying to grasp that when you say group of employees, let's say it happens to be a compensation study on, non-certified staff. And in that particular case, should that be an open meeting?
So generally, if you're talking about a comp study, if you're using it to make determinations for those specific employees, that's different. If you're talking about it because you've commissioned it and it's going to just inform in general, it might be open session. It really depends on how you're using it, what you're using it for. A case-by-case basis, I'd say, is really how you have to evaluate that one. Because I've seen situations, and I know I don't have much time left, but I've seen situations where you have comp that are going to inform, for instance, collective bargaining with the certified teachers union. And in that case, that hits on our next one, competitive bargaining reasons in closed session. You might be able to go into a closed session based on that comp study if it's going to inform your bargaining. On the other hand, if you've requested the comp study and it's more general in purpose, because you want to have a better idea of where other people are, other districts are, and how they're in general, but it's not informing any particular decision about a group of specific employees, that might be different.
Is there a way that our district can reach out for more specifics on those types of questions? Like for instance, like a staffing plan. Sometimes individual staff members can be identified through just the discussion of a staffing plan. However, perhaps maybe a staffing plan should be a discussion for an open session.
Yeah, it depends on, I think you hit the nail on the head. Are the things we're talking about, are they identifiable to a particular, even if you're not naming by name, are they identifiable to certain individuals who then you would be discussing or disclosing information about those specific individuals' employment with the district? All right, I know I just have a few more moments left, so I'm gonna run through these pretty quickly. So number 5 and number 6 there. Number 5 on the top of page 12, discussing things that could be potentially damaging to the reputation of the subject who you're discussing in closed session. That's another time that you can, so for instance, if there's an investigation about allegations of misconduct, we also use this one for student expulsions oftentimes as well. You're talking about information about a person or historical data, behavioral data that might do harm to the reputation if discussed in open session. And then finally, conferring with legal counsel. Note that conferring with legal counsel, it's not enough just to have your attorney sitting in a room. You've got to be discussing litigation that you are involved in or likely to be involved in. So again, it's a real case-by-case analysis, whether or not you're likely to be involved in litigation due to a certain topic, but just know that it's more than just having legal counsel there. I'm going to skip down to the bottom of page 12, taking action in closed session. That is generally not the rule. Usually you're going to come out of closed session and take action in open session. However, it is permissible under some circumstances. If the reason for your vote, if the vote is so tied to the reason for going into closed session that you would jeopardize the integrity of that closed session by voting in open, you can vote in closed. Confidentiality, this is a big one I see a lot lately too. There's nothing in the law that requires board members not to talk about closed session matters. That being said, it is one of the most detrimental things that I see and damaging things I see to boards that want to be efficiently operated, establish credibility with each other, and establish credibility amongst their constituency. And usually it's a policy violation. I haven't looked at your policies, but it likely is. So my advice to all of you is, when you're discussing things in closed session, they should not go outside of closed session. There's a reason you're triggering these statutory exemptions, and you should honor that as a way to build trust and to be an efficient governing body. I'm going to skip notice requirements, and I'll say the last thing on page 14 that I'll touch on. Remember, subunits of of a parent body are also subject to open meetings law. And there are certain, all I'll say is there's certain requirements for posting that are specific to those, especially when members of the full body are going to be attending those committees if they're not members of those committees. So just remember that there's certain posting requirements and attorney general opinions that impact and guide those types of meetings. And then lastly, I'm just going to end by saying there are similar penalties to the public records law for open meetings violations. And so any board member, for instance, that attends a meeting in violation can be subject to a forfeiture of between $25 and $300 per violation. And it's a similar process, right? A complaint is filed with your local district attorney, the attorney general, and there's certain private action rights as well. But ultimately, the lesson is, rely on your administrators. They're working with counsel oftentimes if they have a question about posting. And if something doesn't feel right, you want to readdress it and with either the presiding officer or the administration to make sure that we're in compliance.
All right, thank you, Brian. Questions?
Quick one, so let's say Mike and I knew each other before we got on the board. We're both in labor, he's union, I'm non-union, but we get together for coffee and then we routinely, besides talking economic development and labor, we start routinely talking about school board matters. And by default, form a voting block. And we always agree to vote the same.
Yeah, so
Mike and I don't do that, but.
Good. You made me nervous for a second there.
If we did, where does that put us? We're not negative for them, we're not walking for them.
Right, it's not it wouldn't be a technical violation. It would be a terrible practice that would put you at risk if you do that on a regular basis with anyone else. And you gotta look at the optics too, right? So much of public trust has to do with making sure everything is above board and looks like it's above board, right? And it actually is. And so when people start, and I've seen this lately with, especially with private social media groups, for instance, and board members in these private groups commenting, for instance, it just doesn't, it doesn't look like open government.
I.e. don't do it.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your question got answered?
My question got answered only because I know during the whole COVID thing, members of boards all over the place were either on or running a private social media group, one that would look like they were discussing policy action and everything else prior to meetings happening that those policies ended up coming up on. Just what kind of guidance do you have for our board in relation to either their membership of those and or running those kinds of Facebook pages or something like that? I don't know how much that exists anymore.
Yeah.
But a lot of that happened around COVID. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering thoughts or.
I think there's all kinds of issues. And I think that COVID caught a lot of people unprepared in a lot of ways, but that was one of them, is they didn't understand how do we conduct business. And, and I think the authorities, the powers that be probably cut a little slack because it was unprecedented. But I can say that there's a lot of people who are involved in those private groups and they think, well, it's only a couple of us, but the optics of it looks so bad. I've seen a lot of complaints filed with local district attorneys that say there's a private group and they're talking about public business and we can't get in or we can't access it. And most of the time it's turned out to be nothing, but sometimes there's something there. And sometimes just the optics do so much damage to public credibility of the entire institution of the governing body that it's an issue itself. Not to mention all kinds of problems with public forum, creating a public forum, discriminating against people by not letting them comment or be part of that private group based on viewpoint discrimination, all kinds of things you don't want to get involved in.
Thank you, Brian.
Rick? Thanks a lot.
No more.
Then make sure that those-
Yeah.
Any other questions for Brian? All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Brian.
Next item we have on the agenda is the bullying data update.
What happened to the rest of public comment?
We have another.
There are other people who want to make
We have another
comments.
public comment section at the end of the meeting. Bullying data.
Yes, thank you very much. We always start with gratitude, so I want to thank the board for sharing, looking at some data, and also for the support of a new data sharing model. Your leadership is appreciated. Just a reminder about that new model that We discussed at a planning committee in June, I believe, about a different and new data sharing model. And tonight's the first attempt at this, right? And it really involves Chris and I sharing 3 to 5 minutes of data around cohort, longitudinal, some notable trends, and then next steps. And then 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A. And so this is our first attempt, and next month we're gonna reverse course a little bit and show you some things about WISE-1, but we'll get back to the model. I think it's also important to note that questions prior to us presenting are appreciated. Just allows Chris and I to make sure we're answering the questions that are prevalent, and then we weave it into the conversation. So those are appreciated. I think it's important to note that we're on a journey around being student-driven but data-informed. And we're in the early phases of that journey, and this is one step in that journey. Chris and I will navigate this new model throughout the year, and we'll look for feedback in the spring about what went really well in this different model, what revisions or ideas we have to change it, and we'll use that feedback for next year's data sharing. We want to use this platform to continue to share those things important. Tonight we're going to look at bullying, and this is a mandatory report that we'll share with the board annually. So this is something that we bring forward every year. Our data digging around bullying has already surfaced a couple things. One is that there are inconsistencies in the way we report some behaviors. And we also know that the way it's connected, but the way we report bullying and the way we report harassing needs some clarification. And these are being addressed in a number of ways. One is that Sarah O is doing wonderful work of creating systems for behaviors and reporting behaviors. Chris and I will meet with principals once a month for 30 minutes, kind of replicating this very thing around data and giving their input to keep it fresh with them. An example of some of the conversations that are already occurring is that the high school will gather, I think Thursday this week, to talk about some of those inconsistencies to clean it up with staff. So those things are in place and continue to work. Chris Malloy's here. She's a phenomenal data guru and a more phenomenal human. So the gratitude that I share with Chris can never be enough. So thank you, Chris. And I think we're going to turn it over to Chris. And we're going to talk about cohort, longitudinal, some trends, and then some ideas about next steps. So thank you, Chris.
Yeah. So you guys have had time to look at the data. I just want to kind of talk you through some of the pieces of it, and then we'll be open to questions at the end. You only have 3 years of data because until 2021, we had in Skyward harassing and bullying together. So I can't separate unless I read every referral written in years past. So the 2021 school year is when we first separated harassing and bullying in our Skyward. And that's how I'm pulling them. The data is how it's entered into Skyward by the person that enters the referral for the behaviors. Another kind of small hole in the system that we definitely want to address is the fact that bullying as entered into Skyward, and there are 3 categories, the 3 you have reported here. Bullying by race, bullying by disability, and bullying by gender. Those are not all inclusive ways that you can bully a student, but there are currently no other options in Skyward for us. I have checked with our Skyward guru and looked at the possible ones we can do. And we've discussed maybe creating our own, but we need to make sure that does not mess up our state reporting by adding something that we want that isn't already set up. Because Skyward really kind of usually has it set up how the state wants it. So it's a piece we're looking into. Most of the ones then that would not fit under those will be then stored as a harassment behavior. For it to be bullying versus harassment, we are looking for there to be an imbalance of power between the student that is being bullied and the person that is bullying them. So that is going to be the key difference between when it would be written up as bullying versus when it's going to be harassment. Example of that would be like a senior bullying a freshman notably size and maybe influence in the school. It could also be a group of students forcing the single students. There's going to be an imbalance of power in that situation. A student without disabilities, bullying a student with disabilities that maybe doesn't have the ability to defend themselves physically or verbally in the way that they should be able to. So clarification, as I just gave you to the difference, is something that the high school is really looking to do. The administrators are always looking for those and they can change it if they disagree, talk to the teacher about how it was written out, but having everyone understand the difference between those is an important piece. So when we look at the data then, I looked at it as looking for trends in the data that we could look at trying to fix. One of the big things that you can see is that the class of 2027, last year's freshmen, this year's sophomores, have had the largest number of bullying referrals all 3 years that I'm pulling the data from. This was not really news to the high school staff or the middle school staff that had them before them. They have more referrals in every area, not just that area, but definitely something that they want to address.
Y-axis per year, per day, per week, per student,
Yeah, no, the y-axis is total number of incidents for the year.
for the year.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then if we look at it, also then another piece of data that I kind of didn't have here because it didn't figure is sending to the administrators students that had referrals multiple years. So they bullied in 2022 and then they bullied in 2023. So they've done it more than once. So this is a pattern behavior. And then if they do it again, then the consequences need to address the fact that they have done it in the past. And with students moving buildings, it's important for someone to kind of be pointing those students out to them so that they can be aware of that. So doing that communication for them. And then obviously the other pattern that I kind of pointed out is that the increase in the bullying by race, color, national origin has gone up each year. Again, I looked three years of data. I don't know if we're going to see that kind of level out. Maybe it's just actually starting to get reported accurately versus that first year of data when people didn't even know that they could report something as bullying and we're still putting under harassment. I'm not sure, but data point that I thought was important for us to recognize. I think that I want to open it up to questions right away because I think you had enough time to look at it. Oh, there was one other question that was sent to us before that I did want to address. In 2022-23, so if you're looking at the red bars for the cohort data, if you add them up and then you add up the red bars for the incidents, it doesn't add up completely because some of the kids that committed those have graduated. They were in the class of 2023. Does that make sense to you? So they would be in 13th grade. Right, so there's 3 bullying incidents and I just didn't include them in the cohort data because they are gone and no longer students that we were looking to address their behavior. So
Are we removing the data from any of the students that are leaving the district?
no, it's still stored, no, it's completely in our system for forever.
And my point is, you may want to call that out in the data that, you know, here's the number of incidents, but these students are no longer in the district.
Okay, yep, absolutely, yep. Other questions about the data that we haven't discussed? I didn't try to get a lot of them that we had been given ahead of time.
So when you have bullying and you have harassment, so we also are keeping track of harassment cases. So where does, who's deciding? Is it in both or is it in one or the other?
It's in one or the other.
Okay.
And
Some of these, you know, especially protected classes.
yeah, and it has it both. So you can harass someone based on their race, or you can bully them. Harass or bully, they have both from there, and this teacher has to choose on it. Is there an imbalance of power, or bullying should be a repeated behavior?
So so is there no record? I know Skyward, but we have, if someone is bullying on an outside case, not one of these.
Yeah.
We have really no record of that?
We have a record of it as a harassment behavior where, and I mean, it can be noted there, but we can't pull it that way from the system.
Okay.
I think that's one of the positives of looking at this
Yeah.
data, right? It identifies gaps, and I think that's the exciting part for me, is that we're identifying gaps and doing something about it.
Which is why a big passion of rewriting the policy was for me, because I knew there were gaps. So I think this is great to know.
Great, you know, if I'm not mistaken, I thought board policy, specifies that we would call out bullying instances in all situations. So not just, individual classes of bullying, but also any other cases of bullying. So while this might be in compliance with the state, there's an additional step that we need to take to be in compliance with board policy.
I agree. No, we agree. It's something I've been trying to contact. A, is there a code that we eliminated? Is there a code that we can get in there? And trying to figure out that piece as we're seeing the same thing you guys are. Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Chris, have we identified why the class of 27?
And, or other behaviors, like it's not just that. They have, been a struggle in middle school and their first year in high school. We're hoping they grew up over the summer, but.
I think it's important to know again, as we said, we'll meet with principals once a month, and we have a list of possible data topics to bring. And this would be one of them. And we just want to keep that fresh in principal's mind and talk through what does it mean and what can we do to help.
Next question.
Is there a record of reports? I know we have like the anonymous report, on our website. I've looked at it for a really long time where you can report bullying. Do we have a record of anybody holding on to that or who's looking at that on a regular basis? Do we know?
By individuals.
Well, there's a anonymous where you can report a bullying incident and it's on the website.
So I don't know.
I don't know who's looking at
houses that data.
We looked at also.
Yeah, I will ask questions and find out. I think it's probably housed in building, but then it's probably housed like at a place where I don't have access to it. Do you know what I mean? Like they have a spreadsheet that they created in each building for those or something. And I will find out if they do have those and if I get my hands on them. But then there also, just because it's reported doesn't mean it's verified as true.
Sure,
Right?
but I don't want it just sitting there and not be looked at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Considerations.
But if it was reported and there was an official consequence or something, it would be like Sky would be.
Okay.
It would be, so it doesn't just go and sit there and be unreported. So it would be reported.
Because our policy says records will be maintained on the number and types of reports made and sanctions imposed to incidents found to be in violation. So my understanding is, according to our policy, those need to be maintained also. Because I think if you are getting repetitive reports, even though it's only done one time, let's say they're doing it to 10 different kids, someone needs to talk to that student.
And if it's 10 different kids, it's still repetitive and that would fall
Exactly,
under
even though it's not
for sure.
standard stuff, right?
Yep, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Act 20 update.
Just a quick review. I know this is something that we have touched on quite repeatedly at services. So we did ask for a full board meeting to review the different pieces of Act 20. Just as a reminder, Act 20 was a law that was passed in July of 2023, and we have been working diligently for the past year to implement the various pieces of the law. Tonight, what I'd like to do is just highlight where we're at with certain pieces of that and just be available for any questions. First and foremost, Act 20 really outlines what the curriculum and instruction in early literacy should look like. It outlines exactly which pieces of instruction should be included with that. Specifically, Act 20 does outlaw or prohibit, outlaw is a strong word, the use of the 3 cueing instruction. This is something that our literacy coaches have been working really diligently on with the last 3 years with our teaching staff. So we are currently, as you know, undergoing a review of our curriculum for elementary literacy. The curriculum that we currently use does use the MSB. However, like I said, our literacy coaches have been working over the past few years to transition our teachers away from using that as the primary model of instruction. Assessment, I know that Mr. Bull shared our assessment calendar and you are aware that we are using AimsWeb that was announced in July as the single reading screener across the state. Because of the date that it was announced, the fall screening is not a required screening. Again, we are working with literacy coaches to learn more about Ames Web. We have used it in the past in other areas, so it's not completely unfamiliar to us. But the first screening of that will be in the winter screening period. I should note that families are not able by law to opt out of this, so this is a little bit different than like the full exam, where families do have the option to opt out of that. We do have to do a diagnostic reading assessment for any child who shows up as at risk below the 25th percentile on that. Our coaches and Title I teachers are working very diligently to outline what that will look like. Families do need to be notified of the results of the reading screener no later than 15 days after the assessment is scored. And then if the assessment indicates that the child may be at risk, we do need to provide information about how to make a special ed referral, more information about dyslexia. One area that we are waiting for additional information from the state about is the personal reading plan. And again, this goes back to that screener. If the student scores below the 25th percentile, we do have to create a personal reading plan. The state just issued guidance as of, I believe, last week about how that interacts with the students who would have that in. So Sarah and I will be working together with that. There are some provisions about transitioning from 3rd to 4th grade if the child has not yet exited their personal reading plan, and that does include some intensive summer school work as well. I know we have been working on our retention policy, and we should be getting some guidance from the state. They should be releasing a sample guidance policy for that. One area that I feel like we have made the most progress with is that required reading training. As you remember, the board did invest some of our ESSER dollars to support training our K or 5K through 5th grade teachers using keys to literacy. Our teachers engaged in that over the summer. Dozens of hours per teacher have been implemented with that, and our teachers will continue that work throughout the school year. So I can tell you that our teachers should be completed with that by the end of the 2024-25 school year. It is only required that we start that by July 1 of 2025. However, we felt really strongly if we were looking at new materials, we wanted our teachers to understand the why behind new materials. It has been fabulous because in those trainings, they've been discussing what they've been learning, taking a look at our current curriculum and saying, where does it meet, where does it not meet, to build a better understanding of that. Our principals, I'm proud to report, have been doing their training through the AIM Institute. I know when they're done because they very excitedly share with me their certificate that they passed their test. So our teachers or our principals will be, our elementary principals will be completed with that by July 1st of 2025. Finally, we do have some reporting that we have to share with the state, and you can see all the different pieces of information that we will have to share with the state by July 15th of 2025. Essentially explaining which of our students, not by name, but how many of our students, I should say, were identified as at risk, what assessments that we're using, and then what type of progress we made with those interventions that we've done. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to share them with me, but I do think it's important to keep you up to date to where we're at with that. It has definitely been a great learning experience for our teachers over the summer, and it is not brand new learning, but it is certainly reinforcing what we've done in the past. And what we really appreciate about that training is that it focuses specifically on things they can be doing in their classroom for students who may be struggling in some of these areas. So.
Thank you, Jen. Questions?
Will this at some point, as you're going through this and things like that, it sounds like there's going to be a summer school component. So then will that be kind of weaved into how we're looking at summer school?
Yes, and we need to be sure the law states essentially that there's intensive instruction offered to students over the summer. There is no requirement that we make students attend that. So yes, it will be right into our summer school planning. And the law is very specific about students going from 3rd to 4th grade. We're not quite where they need to be at, but I think we know the importance of that summer instruction for students with literacy. And I will say that I think that we have done a lot of work post-COVID with those classes to ensure that we have high quality instruction happening for students who may be struggling with literacy. But it never hurts to continue to look at that and make sure that we are meeting their needs.
Jenny, when's the next, is the course set for this year? Or is the die cast? Is there another check-in? Is there a course correction? Or are we just doing what we're doing? We've agreed to do what we've agreed to train, the curriculum we have, the path we've set until we report on July 15th? Or should this board or as services expect an update or any type of changes in how we're doing things between now and then?
Yeah.
Or we're pretty set? What
No.
are those gonna look like?
We're set, but we're set with check-ins on ed services as it relates specifically to the curriculum adoption process. I do think it's fair as we dive into the data to, you know, update the boards with how many reading plans have we, or here's the draft of the reading plan that we're doing. I have to make sure that that's part of my further update. I know I've gotten away from the direct updates, have gotten long, but I imagine.
You're on par. They're all 2.5-hour meetings this month. Okay.
Any other questions? All right. We're going to our next item tonight, the strategic plan presentation.
So I am here, but I can't show my face or share the screen. It has to be enabled for me.
Can you hear me Laurie, or no?
I can hear you, Jared. Can you hear me?
Hold on just a second. We're trying to get you on the screen in the room here.
Perfect.
Do you have sharing capabilities for share screen? Yeah. Or you can use some sharing capabilities too, so you can share your presentation.
It sounds good. Okay, so that worked. Here we go.
Okay, we can see it on the screen now too.
Perfect. Let me just make sure I can turn on my video then for you. There we are. Hello, everybody. And let me share my screen again. So first of all, I just want to say again how grateful we are at the Diamond Group that we've had a chance to partner with the school district to embark on this journey that you all are in terms of redefining where you go as you move forward as a school district over the next 3 to 5 school years here. And I want to share with you the process that we've used, and our goal for tonight is really to share out that process and present to you the main components of the plan based on all the hard work of your community members, staff, and families, and then outline the next steps that we will take to implement the plan. Want to make sure I give you an opportunity to ask any questions, but ultimately we're seeking board approval to move forward with the main components of the plan to lend us the next steps in terms of operationalizing the plan. So I think it's always good to start with why do we do this again? And we talked about this at the very beginning of the process when I first came to you and said we do strategic planning because it's a great opportunity to gather everybody around the different groups of your community to have a collective focus around why do we exist as a school district? What's our role? It provides intention and focus moving forward for continuous improvement. And it'll guide decision-making over the next couple years. Often we will be posed with questions about what step do we want to take? Do we want to pursue a new strategy that's in the educational landscape? And sometimes we can just pause and go back to our strategic plan and ask ourselves, does this meet our priorities and what our community has told us is important right now? And that helps shape the next steps. We'll definitely set some specific actions for progress. And once we have those actions set, it'll allow us to monitor, evaluate, and adjust as we need to moving forward. So that's why we do this plan. And here are the steps that we've taken over the past couple of months. And I want to say, you know, working with other districts across the country with strategic planning, I have been most impressed by the Watertown Unified School District with the level of engagement and the sincerity in the work as we've brought people together over the course of the summer months to put together a new plan. The steps that we took opportunity each meeting to kind of assess the state of the district, like what's working, what's not, where do we might want to grow. We developed a new mission and a new vision statement, which we'll present to you tonight. And we did this work by identifying where are we strongest and areas where we need to improve. What are some opportunities out there that we might want to take advantage of in our school district, and also have a lens on what might be threatening to our success moving forward. We also define core values that we hold for our students, and we hope to see reflected in the adults that are working with those students. And ultimately, it's about meeting needs, right? Like if we can understand the needs that our students, our staff, and facilities are facing, that helps us determine the priorities for us moving forward. And once we have those priorities set, then we can start working on that in terms of goals to meet those needs. So that's the journey we've been on. And I would like to say we're at the end, but really this is just the beginning, because now that we have the plan, now that the real hard work comes. So let's go through the plan. We will start with the mission statement. And when we worked with your community members and staff, we asked, you know, what are these three questions? What three questions here? These three questions will guide what your mission statement should be. And we talked about the mission as it's our why. It's like, why, what are we doing today with our students, our staff, our families, and answering these questions. What do we do? Whom do we serve? And how do we serve them? So after several evenings together and working with a very large group with diverse perspectives and thoughts, I'm very pleased to present to you a drafted new mission statement. And just for fun, we're going to read it. We serve our students by providing educational opportunities to promote academic excellence and a lifelong love of learning. And so we came forward after our last meeting with your work group and combined everybody's feedback into a synthesized statement. From there, we talked about that statement as a district leadership team. And then we brought that sample or draft statement to your planning committee. And in the end, this is the result. And I think it captures the aspects of all different groups that have come together for the best interest of our students. The next thing we focused on was our vision statement. And our vision statement is where are we going? It's our tomorrow, it's our future. And so if we actualize our mission, if we are doing what we say we're doing in our mission statement, then we will have success in the future with inspiring learners, with student-centered education strengthened by community involvement. And we're using this tagline, tradition, innovation, and transformation, as a way to brand our strategic plan moving forward. We know that Watertown is steep in tradition, and we are focused in our work right now in innovating and making ourselves a district that has its own niche compared to all those other districts in the state in your neighboring area. And if we're focused on continuous improvement, we'll change, right? We'll change for the better, and we'll continue. I mean, that's the goal of most educational entities, is to get better each day. And with that comes a transformation. We continue to get better. So that's been our driving force. And then we look at our core values. And what we did here is we asked all of your participants of your work group to prioritize their top values that they hold for students. And again, we want to see reflected in the adults who are working and serving with those students. And the top ones are listed here for you, and they're in alphabetical order. But I will tell you that the number one value that came out of the group was empathy. So that was, if it was a race, empathy won the race. And you can see here the definitions that were set, again, through a collective effort from all those who participated and identified these core values as their top values. Then we're asked to define them in their own words. And then we were able to synthesize that and got these lovely statements here for you after our leadership team and again, planning committee had a chance to read through them and make sure that they fit the context of the Watertown Unified School District. And then probably the most important piece, depending, I guess, on who you talk to, but I think this is the most important piece as our priorities. What's going to guide our work moving forward outside of that mission and vision? And we landed on 5 different priority areas. And I think they cover all aspects of education and our why. So the first one is really focused on our students in terms of their performance and growth. So we want to have inspired academic excellence for all of our students. We want to see growth in each and every one of our students. So that speaks to education, our teaching and learning. All in team represents our people. You know, everybody who comes together to uplift the work of our students, to make sure that our students have success. It's our team. So this is your educators, your staff, everybody who pitches in to make sure that our students have the best experience. The third one is connecting as community. And the community is heavily invested in the school district. That is evident. And so looking at ways to lean into that as a school district moving forward by creating deeper connections, deeper levels of engagement, and supporting our students so that they're ready to be active individuals in the Watertown community while they're in school and once they leave graduation stage. The next one is intentional resource allocation. This is about leveraging the funding that we do have and looking at the ways that we can make sure that operations are sustainable and to make sure that we can continue to protect the services and programs that we offer to our students to give them that student experience. And the last one is about innovative facilities and use, looking at different ways to use our facilities in ways that maybe are more relevant and meaningful for our students and our community. And thinking about, you know, do we need to do upgrades to those facilities? Do we build new? Or do we just need to rethink the way we use our facilities? So these 5 priority areas guide the work then moving forward over the next couple years. So if we pull it all together, I'm happy to share with you a draft of just visually how we can pull this all together with that lens of tradition, innovation, and transformation. This is still work that we're working on. Once we have your approval board, we will finalize this work, but I wanted to give you a sense of how this all pulls together in a visual representation to share with your community, your audiences, and individuals throughout. And I think what's really important for us to do is take some time, answer any questions that you may have. But our next steps are, we really would like you to consider this plan moving forward. And we'd love to have your action in terms of approving a mission, vision, the core values, and the priority areas, so the main components. From there, we will go deep into developing a series of communications to roll out the strategic plan. So we'll do simple things like creating a news release and some social media posts about the action to move forward with the plan. We'll help the district create a specific web page for the strategic plan, as well as creating visuals or signage in terms of posters, fact sheets that you can use in your work across the community and with other stakeholders. And we'd like to create a brochure that you can use to market the school district and showcase the great things that the district has to offer to students and families in the community with the approach and lens of the strategic plan. So wrapping those two together into a nice deliverable that you can use in many different ways, as well as a video that works to do the same thing, to promote the school district as well as share out the strategic plan and talk about why you all exist there in your area for students and families. With that then comes the hard work that I alluded to before. It's time to operationalize the plan once you take action. And what that means is we'll take each of the priority areas and set goals for students related to those priority areas. And with each priority area, we determine certain tactics that we're going to deploy each year to guarantee success for those goals that we've set. We will also identify who's responsible for overseeing each of the priority areas and those tactics to make sure we are making progress, as well as being able to come back and share progress with you all in a number of ways. I envision, some quarterly updates, if not more frequent updates to the board about that progress. We've talked about creating other tools to share progress with our larger community. And we'll do that by identifying what does success look like. If we're being successful in the area of all-in team with a particular strategy of maybe hiring the best staff that we can do, if that becomes our goal and a strategy that we need to, or strategies that we need to develop for that goal, then we want to report out to you on how we're doing in that particular area. So it's important that once the plan is developed and we have our actions set, that we keep coming back to it, monitoring, evaluating, and responding. And that's the real hard work that's ahead of us as we continue on this journey. So I'm going to stop talking and I welcome questions from the board or any extra comments from those who participated in the process. I know Mr. Bull is there to maybe perhaps assist with that, so I'll turn it over.
Yeah, so obviously we're basically 2/3 the way through. We still need to implement goals, tactics, talk about roles and responsibilities, and indicators for success, and create a reporting template for you. But all that work is predicated on how you sit as a board right now with what has come to you from the planning committee. What you saw in the mission statement, the vision statement, our priorities, our core values, came to you through a meeting of the planning committee. And they took in all the consideration of all of the meetings we had with our public, the different work group sessions and other things that came in, as well as emails, conversations with the superintendent. I shared before. All of those pieces of information they took together and they finalized a draft mission statement, core values and priorities. What the administration needs to know from you is some voice acclamation that is the path we're going down. Now I realize that in the end, right, we'll bring you the rest of the goals, tactics, and everything else that go along with that. In the end, you may say, we need to finalize this by tweaking the mission statement or the vision statement. And if you do tweak it, I may have to go back and say, okay, that's going to change the ordinance. But in order for us to really continue moving forward with the staff, we need to know that you're 98, 99% behind what has been drafted to this point, so that we can continue forward. Realizing that in the end, when it's all done, that's when you put your stamp of approval on it and you make it a resolution from the board. So I'd like to hear from the board, are we 99, 98% the way there with the mission, vision, values, and so on? Or is there still discussion that the board needs to have on that so that we can move forward?
Point of order, Mr. President, would it be appropriate to recommend a resolution on this so that we can actually do a voice vote, or do you just want a discussion on it?
I want a discussion on it. I purposely didn't put a resolution on the agenda for tonight because I didn't want us to micromanage the strategic plan every time the piece is brought forward to us to have another resolution.
Got it.
I want the resolution to be on.
We don't want to do it part and parcel. We want to do a resolution for the whole thing. But I do need, direction from the board that says, no, This is what we're having.
I'll give you my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, and I will say though, to Jared's point, nothing is set in stone until we do that resolution, as Jared said. So we can come back and we can change anything as we move along the way, because we see the goals come up, and we're like, hey, look, this doesn't align, we want to change this, that. Left it open so that we can have those discussions. So, other board members? Okay.
Yeah, I felt like, I support the recommendation from the committee to keep this as it's written. What the committee happened to have a robust discussion, took into consideration everybody's perspective, and came up with a neutral mission and vision statement. And I support that.
Couple things that come up, so I need to parse them out or whatever. I know during our discussion in the planning committee, as we were, kind of going through discussing different things regarding the vision statement, in a second look at this, when I take a look at.
Lori, can you pull the vision statement back up?
I sure can, yes.
When I take, no, I went back and I got like the previous vision statement.
Yeah, the draft.
report.
The
Yeah,
draft.
there you go.
Draft. Yeah.
Draft. So when we take a look at that and we're just comparing it to, what we're looking at right here. And I know there was discussion as far as like, okay, valuing diversity and tradition and, and working with the school pride and, those kinds of things. I brought up a question about that, and comparing it to the draft version kind of pulls me in a little bit more as far as like being more like Watertown as far as that's concerned. It gives me a little bit more meat. It feels like the one that we have in the document tonight feels a little bit more general. It kind of feels a little like more stamped kind of thing. The reason I gave that some more thought as far as, I know we talked about, diversity. And I guess the reason that I appreciate kind of some of what the draft had in it is when I think about the diversity of who we are as a community and who we, like our schools, our elementary schools, for example. Like I know we're very proud of, we have LEAP and we have STEM and we have traditional and we have, we have all the different choices there. And I know we're very proud of that. And I know we're proud as far as the different programs that we offer. We've got Avid and we've got, STEM in the middle school. And then when it comes to the high school, we just have all these different pathways. And so I feel like keeping some of, whether it's diversity and tradition or, I don't know, I'm not a wordsmith, but taking a look at those pieces, I just feel like that represents a little bit more of Watertown and helps me feel a little bit more connected to really about who we're about, what we offer and who we serve, because we have all those options because we serve, different needs and things like that as far as the students in the population. So that's my thought as far as vision statement goes.
Do you have any suggestions?
I know, I was like, okay, how do I wordsmith this in here? I wasn't able to come up with a specific thing, but I certainly can do that, yeah.
We can make changes along the way, folks, too.
I have other pieces, but I don't.
Can I say yes?
Yep. Let's stick with the mission statement right now.
We had a discussion on that because I felt similarly. We have a very strong program, a very strong in our dual language and things like that. And through some of the wordsmithing, you know me, going to listen. What I hung up my hat on then was that student-centered education. It's those pieces. We're never going to get rid of inclusion in our schools. It's here by law. We are diverse. I went and I looked at about 20 other mission and vision statements across the state of Wisconsin to see, do they have words of inclusion? Do they have words of diversity? Do they have words of things that we naturally do in education, and none of them did. So that's where I want to see, are we missing the mark or are we not? And I thought, whether it was, like, I was one of the first to say, you know, I didn't want to lose what the community came up with, but at the same token, we do have to wrap ourselves around that as well. So as I looked at other statements, not saying we have to do what anybody else is doing, just does our statement compare with some of the others? And there's a lot of similarities, you know, a lot of those keywords. So with it, we went with the approach of being a bit more general to be all encompassing. And then what's going to happen with that, with the goals and other things, are where the specific things will come in. And then we talked about our facility study. We're going to have our dual language program. We're going to have our ag program. We're going to have those things that we, all those pieces are still going to be part of our district. We're not losing that. That's where the tradition comes in. And so one of the things wordsmithing is, okay, that's a piece of our tradition. We're not losing our tradition. It states that on almost everything we do. Tradition, innovation, and transformation. And so through that conversation, not only having that now kind of recap for the public too, where that went, there was a long discussion through that we didn't want a paragraph for each of these, that this says point blank, we hold true to the traditions that we have, and we're not going to lose that. And as a board, we stand behind that. And that was the conversation. I think there were 8 of us present at that meeting, 7 or 8. And it was consensus through that the stance was there for those pieces.
Other comments?
Did someone else okay? Did a great job of that.
Kim, what's next?
Okay, my next one, thank you. As far as core values are concerned, what are we gonna do with those?
That's Jason question.
Is it gonna be like placards?
Jason, do you want to share your idea for this?
I think there are a number of things that we can do with this. One idea that, as Dr. Burke mentioned, we're getting some feedback about goals now as part of the next steps. And one idea that we're bringing forward to the internal team on Thursday is to use those core values as the foundation of our student engagement surveys. And so we've asked questions around empathy, honesty, and those core values, and begin to gather data around those very things. Another piece that I've seen in districts using their core values is what they call touchstones. And so we work with community partners to have those core values really throughout our community. You go to the local subway, you see those core values up there, and our students know we're in partnership. And so those things will come around and discussions, and you'll see that as part of our goal setting process.
Other questions? I have one question. What's under empathy? What's a caring and school community? Can we remove word and there, say a caring school?
Yeah.
Community?
Yes, I'll take care of that. I think that happened through our wordsmithing as a planning committee.
It was a long meeting.
It was.
Go back once. Please.
Which one?
Go back one more. One more. Same thing here.
In the priority areas.
The priority area, sorry, thank you. It's a little hard to
What's
hear.
Facilities and use. Should it be innovative facilities use?
It's,
No.
I think, right, I think it's important to have them separate because it could be use or it could be additional or new facilities as well.
All right, the only other question I have is we discussed the vision. Is there any discussion on the mission?
Time out back to vision. So Tina made a statement. I commented on that statement. Do we have a decision based on where to go?
Do we have affirmation on leaving it as is? You seem to agree with Diana's description of the vision statement and the intent behind it.
I can understand where you're coming from, you know, as far as that goes and encapsulating it all. I'm just concerned with kind of assuming it's encapsulated, it makes it more generic.
Your thoughts?
I think it's unlikely that we're going to violate the law and stop, you know, providing ELA services or anything like that. I think it works very well as it is.
Yeah. Great.
I think, every staff member, in this district strives to provide, love, dignity, and respect to every student. So, it's valuable who we are as a district, as a community.
Lori, what did you say to that?
Vision?
Vision, yes, thank you. And I will tell you, I struggled with the word adding diverse in this. One of the things that I think I agree with you there, I would look at when we inspire diverse learners to student-centered education, but I think the devil's in the detail there with the student-centered education. If we say diverse learners, we have to define what's diverse learners, and if we just say learners, that's all. And we have all learners with student-centered education. I think any adjective that we put in front of that shrinks that pool. And again, that's where I'm going with that. And I looked and tried to figure out where we can put that. But again, to Diana's point, student-centered education, really, that's what we do. That's what we key on from, you know, our IEPs, from our learning programs, all these things we have, you know, new language program, all of these things are student-centered. I think that's our North Star.
Do people outside of an educational environment know that that's what that is? Like if I read that without my, you know, inner knowledge, you know, I'm like student-centered education, like what does that
I think it's student-focused.
Well, and to that point, you know, it's hard sometimes to just look at the mission or vision without the context of additional language or explanation. And so when we talked about putting together like a brochure or a video, that's where we get to go in detail and share what do we mean by student-centered education. So that won't be lost, I don't believe. I think it's just hard sometimes to look at this without the whole context.
This is part of the reason that I want us to have a discussion tonight, but not have a specific resolution, because as we go through, as Jason builds out the rest of the plan, as we get the other steps in this, we can look back and go, yeah, you know what, maybe we need to tweak this a little bit. And I didn't want us to lock in this as we move forward until we got down to the whole thing and said, yep, we're good with this. So, I mean, if we're good, just generally moving forward in this direction with this, that would be good enough for tonight, and they can keep moving, that's what we're looking at, but we're not locking anything in until we get that final resolution. Good with that?
Yeah.
All right, any comments on the mission statement before we move forward? No? All right, then we have a very general acclamation from the board that we will move forward with this. Jason will continue the work on this with the rest of the administration, and to the idea of presenting the final last drafty draft to us for a resolution that the board will be all along the way in that discussion. So as we see, we can make changes and adjustments as we go. Yes.
Yes, I agree. Pardon me. I'm sorry. As far as the going forward piece, you know, when we're looking at priority areas, I just wanted to make sure as far as that part of it, being on the HR committee, we did like the employee satisfaction survey and did, you know, different things that are really important to staff and, you know, recruitment, retention, all those things that affect the educational environment. So I just, as far as like, as we're determining those priority areas, different things like the employee satisfaction survey, is that going to be part of determining those pieces and how we go forward to be able to bring those together?
Yeah, so I would say that would be one of our measures of success, you know, what we're looking at, but also when you get to like the area of all in team, right? That speaks to our work with the HR committee about retaining and, you know, popping up staff, working together as it focuses towards student learning. And so any goals in that area will certainly come out of the HR department in relation to how are we going to take a staff approach to supporting student learning. Okay, and you'll see some action areas in that and ways to measure it.
In our current strategic plan that we've done over the last 5 years, we have 3 general buckets, our student success, whatever. Am I correct in my thinking that our priority areas, there are 5 of them, they will replace those 3 general buckets. So now we have 5 general areas that drive our decision making. That is correct.
That's correct. So you'll have goals under each of those 5 areas, priority areas.
Written SMART goals and action steps.
Action steps, who's responsible, and how are we going to pull out there. You know, Jason and the team will create an action as to seeing all of the data that we're gathering on those goals. What is the most important for us to keep that? And that will be just administratively, we'll probably keep more data than we share with you in the community about everything. You're gonna have to help us narrow that to what's the most important that you want to keep an eye on. We will have to keep an eye out even more than that as we do with general operations. At least you'll see that. You'll see what kind of data we're trying to keep, how we're gonna monitor those goals, timelines for those goals, and so on. We've already started working with our admin team on this year's goals, so we can get them ready, moving as fast as we can with our students, even in draft form. But we're gonna have 3 to 5 years worth of goals for and when it's completed and all done and ready to go. We're gonna need staff for that. So my goal, even starting tomorrow with our welcome ceremony, is to go over with the draft of our mission, vision, priority areas, and our core values, talk about how we're going to do this.
All right. Aren't you noticed? Good. All right. Moving on to the next item on our agenda.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, everybody.
Facilities study update from our friends at the PRA. Been standing in our hallway waiting.
It still looks really good.
Okay.
It's just really long, we're waiting so long, I just.
Yeah, I don't know if the jacket. Wardrobe choice.
Hey, I don't want to end up walking off with your list. Would it be okay if I put the signing list just right here so we don't accidentally grab it with our paper just on accident? I wouldn't want that to happen.
Okay.
Ready for it?
All right, hi. It's so good to see you all again, be back with you. I think the last time we were with the board was in June. So we're excited to be back with you. This evening, we're gonna just do a real quick round of reintroduction. And so our team with you here this evening, it's a pleasure to be back with you. Melissa Thompson, I work for PRA as a Director of Education Strategy. Also joining me this evening is Nick Kent, who's a partner in the Education Studio, as well as Devin Keck, who is also a partner, and both of them are also educational planners. So we're excited to be with you. We are ready for slide. If you are. Is there something, did you want me to drive?
I'll drive her somewhere.
Okay, good. We're good to go. There we go. Thank you. So we, earlier this spring,
went through the first 2 steps in our process with you. And so tonight we're here back kind of with the second half of the 3rd step. And so we're here with you this evening to help reaffirm the direction you gave us in June, as well as identify top options for further development from those choices, pricing, kind of next steps, as well as next steps for community feedback. Next, please. So the process to date, as the board will recall, is that, as we said, we have been through a full facilities condition assessment of each and every building in the district. We've also reviewed all of your school sites for educational space adequacy. And then in June, we formally commenced concept development. And that is kind of where we are today. And we're going to start shifting towards 4, perhaps by the end of this evening, a little bit. So with that, we're ready for the next as well. If, just to refresh yourselves, I know board members, you had this in advance and it was posted on board docs, but if you wanted to refresh yourself with any of the prior reports, the first one we did was the step 1 report, and that was for fiscal management committee, and that is linked to the actual presentation in board docs. The same is true with the second one, and then the full presentation that was provided to the board on May 20th. And with that, we are ready for what's next.
All right. This is where we actually get to turn the page and start to talk a little bit more about what the future could look like, what some ideas for the future may be, and that's options development. So as we go through this, Devin's going to take us really through the fun stuff. We're not going to see renderings, we're not going to see plans, we're not going to see designs for buildings. We're a long, long ways from that. What we're really looking at are big ideas, and we're going to talk about, are any of these ideas things that we want to carry forward and develop further and gather more input on. So if you click that slide, please. Before we jump in, we just wanted to refresh everybody's memory. We're gonna go pretty quickly through these first slides, but this one is kind of important. This is capturing the work that we all did together back in June at that retreat. And kind of critical memories here are really what the board parameters were that we left understanding. And I'm just going to touch on these real quick. One, we heard maintaining status quo is really not an option, right? We need to do something other than just continue to maintain status quo. Discovering and implementing fiscal efficiencies, for example, grade level alignment, is something that we wanted to explore as we look at our facilities. Maintaining the EL and dual language option, but remaining programming should be studied, so we're going to keep that. We heard that that was a critical piece that has to remain. Consolidate elementary footprints, combine middle school and high school to one campus was something to explore. Ultimately have a one campus model for all schools via grade level centers of not less than 4 grades per building. If it helps get down to a one campus model, that was something to explore. And then the long range facilities plan, this kind of dovetails with what you all just talked about. The long range facilities plan really needs to sync with the district strategic plan, okay? So very quickly, we've already seen this information, but a very quick review, the middle and high school buildings in review. And we picked these 2 because they will factor into some of the options as we go forward. So again, the existing conditions report at the middle school, we had some needs in various elements of that facility, but it has a great site. Click. The total cost of maintenance, if we did nothing to that building for the next 20 years in today's dollars, was just under $23 million for that facility. So again, all that detail is in the reports that are online. Click. Of most importance here is that piece of land, right? So you can see on that site, the orange is the current building, the red is where we have parking or pavement, and all that purple space, this is in your packets, is available land that we can build on. There is an area toward the south that is wetlands, so that's a place that we need to stay away from, but this is a very good site for the community to think about what the future may hold. The high school, the newest building in the district. So here, again, we saw less maintenance because it is the newest facility in the district, with really accessibility being our highest need. Click the slide, please. This is the biggest number, but it's also the biggest building, by far the biggest site. So over the next 20 years, we are looking at about $45.3 million. And somebody might say, that's our newest building. How is that possible? This newest building is now over 30 years old. So things do age. Click that slide. Here we have truly the blessing of size and land with 110 acres, give or take. This is actually your site so big it doesn't fit onto one slide. It splits. The north part is on the left, the south part is on the right. Again, with the orange being your building. Now, we have a lot of land here to work with. We have some zones that are really not usable, particularly the area to the east. We have wetlands that we want to stay away from, and we have an area on the north side, so the left side of the slide. We have a lot of topography. We have forests. It's an area that we really want to stay away from as well. We do have several areas of large tracts of land that can be considered for use in the future. Next slide. This is an interesting piece. So as we study the land, particularly north of Endeavor Drive, you see lots of open space. There's a lot of topography, about 40 feet of elevation change when you look at that hill that actually exists within those trees. So this is just something that we want to be cognizant of as we think about what we may or may not want to consider building on these sites at some point in the future.
Doug. All right, up next is our options response to the board parameters. I'm gonna go through a bunch of different options. Again, these are big explorations, everyone, right, that you charged us to go through. All pricing beyond maintenance, which we've already seen, are benchmarking costs, okay? That's not what it costs today, tomorrow, 10 years, or 100 years from now. They're benchmarking numbers from me. There are people that are more experienced in this. But what I've done is attempted to give you a cost in what all the dollars would be in 2025. That said, the numbers will change. Typically, when you do any kind of project of kind of the magnitudes that we're just, right, again, exploring tonight, there will be some cost overlap and then reduction, right? If we're taking over a whole bunch of maintenance, well, maybe a little bit of that is an overlap because we are improving an elementary school program at a site, right? This might be an ag program at a school site. So we don't need to do that maintenance because those renovations already include that cost. And then also some assumptions needed to be made, right? So we're expecting a demography study to be concluded. So that might weigh into some of the discussions. And also construction type. That's another layer of detail that I'll save you all from right now, but could also factor in. So numbers, as you've seen them already, here's the different levels for all of our existing buildings. And the reason I'll really kind of sit on this slide for a minute is I want to explain this graphic, okay? So the top line of buildings, that's our current state, okay? So they're all a light gray. We've got all of our elementary school buildings on the left-hand side. We can't forget about where we are tonight at the ESC, and then also Riverside Middle School and the high school. When we move to the next line, the darker gray, that means that we're addressing maintenance needs at those buildings. The little numbers and everything that are within them, that's the grade level configuration. In this option, where we just do maintenance, that maintains and is the same. Next slide, please. Here, since we haven't already revisited these maintenance numbers on our elementary schools, there is also need there, just like there is at our other school buildings. These ones are a bit smaller though. So you can see the total impacts, and again, over a 20-year period. Next slide, please. So you asked us to look at a couple different options. One was a single campus solution. The other was beginning to look at a 2-campus solution. So each one of these improvements or explorations, they have a cost range. Again, right, this is based on assumptions and all the caveats I told you about just a moment ago. In this option, 2-campus solution, option A, we go from existing down to the yellow line, phase 1. So in this option, we would explore consolidating from 5 to 3 elementary schools, maintenance to the middle and high school. If we look at taking this building we're in here offline or utilizing it for something else, we'd have a addition onto the high school, as we see that as our most available land or most receptive to receiving a building perhaps of this size. And then we're also targeting some dollars to restore other elementary school sites to a green field site. Okay, so there's cost parameters to each one of those. As we look at the graphic again, because you're seeing something new, right? I talked about an addition onto the high school for the ESC, so that's shown in yellow. As we move over into phase 2, right? These different phases, they might be 10, 20, 30, it might be 40, 20, 60 years to get into phase 3 on these, right? We don't know what these are. We're trying to forecast out the steps. And these phases can get broken down even more because, right, we're talking about large dollars that your community would likely need to choose to support to do some of these or all of these moves. Okay, so we shift over to phase 2. Here you're now seeing a diagonal hatch line, okay? That means heavy renovation. Heavy renovation would include providing the needs to meet the learning targets that are established through conversations that we've had to date that look out into that future forecasting and align with your strategic plan. In phase 2, what you could see is renovating. Let me start with the second bullet, actually. Move the middle school or create an addition onto the high school to receive middle school students. Wow, you're looking at that dollar amount. That dollar amount also includes improvements to high school CTE, ag, as well as the arts. So digital, ceramic, 2D, that kind of thing, okay? Just want to give an example of that because it isn't just a middle school solution. So what happens to Riverside then? Well, that would be renovating that to be a 5-section elementary school. And this could be set up as a school within a school. So we still had a STEM program. We still had an ag program, right? We learned about all that available land. We could still have schools within a school. So even though configuration of buildings is changing, the programs potentially can even be supported and celebrated even more. And then you'll see a dollar amount there for taking a building offline. And again, whenever we're addressing that, it would be to restore it to a greenfield site for the community or for other development. In phase 3, then to get to a true 2-campus solution, we'll look at building or constructing a new 5-section elementary school. It could be on the middle school, or it could be on the high school site. As Nick mentioned before, there's available land north of Endeavor Drive there, or as we know it, north of what is Riverside Middle School at this time. Okay, I'll go a little bit quicker because I had to explain the graphics and everything. So now that's all out of the way. Again, 2-campus solution, option B. Here's a larger step that impacts the elementary schools differently. But again, I mentioned schools within a school celebrating existing programming. Here it would be taking those buildings as listed, as well as the ESC offline, moving the ESC to the high school, maintenance to the high school, and constructing a new 5-section elementary school, again, either at the middle or the high school site. So that could be phase 1. Phase 2 is moving middle schoolers over to the high school site. Again, talking about sharing and supporting curriculum that can be utilized by both each of those grade level communities and potentially even sharing staff at those schools as well. Then renovating the existing Riverside Middle School to be a 5-section elementary school. And then again, at that point, you can move on from the other 2 elementary schools as listed there. Next slide. Option C, sorry, this is a lot, right? There's only 3 more, so including this one. But there could be endless solutions, right? So again, these are exploratory thoughts that we're progressing through with a bit of detail, but still assumptions behind them. So again, moving from existing down to phase 1, create an addition on the high school for the middle school students, as well as the ESC, and that's that yellow box. The high school then receives that heavy renovation, hence the diagonal crosshatch to support high school students as well as the middle schoolers. In this one, we would renovate the middle school to be a 5-section elementary school. You're seeing here, there's 2 different cost options. So one is kind of a full-on renovation of that. The other one is a little bit lighter of a renovation. It still costs money. It's commercial construction. I apologize, but as soon as we have to get the state involved and us stamping drawings, it costs more money. It is what it is. So and then the line item at the bottom in blue is take the elementary school, or take the ESC, excuse me, offline, as well as the 3 listed elementary schools. Phase 2, in that one, we're doing a little bit of less work. It would be constructing a new 5-section elementary school, again, on either one of those sites. Or as another kind of wrinkle, we could build that same elementary school potentially on property to be determined. Where is growth in the school district boundaries? Is that something that we want to look at? Is that something that should be captured if there is a new development or of housing of some kind coming online? How do we make sure that those kids are coming to Watertown? Next slide. A single campus solution. So hopefully in Nick's site utilization diagrams that he shared, you can understand this is maybe a little more challenging, right? So he mentioned how much land we have at the high school, but there's a lot of fields. We need those for activities, athletics, as well as physical education. There are some underutilized areas. There are also some areas that just can't be utilized because of steep grade, because of floodplain, because of wetlands that are on the site. The disc golf course, the hill that's there, that's over 40 feet tall. There's some existing impediments on that site. So one campus, option D. Build a new 5-section elementary school on the high school site. So this would be north of Endeavor Drive, more than likely. Maintenance to the Middleland High School. ESC would be an addition onto the high school, that little tiny block. And then take off the other buildings as listed offline again, restore those sites to a greenfield. And then in phase 2 of this, or again, as I mentioned, this might be able to be broken down further, right, as you start to see lots of ors in the explanation. Could expand the high school to also include middle school students. So perhaps this is a lighter touch. This is something we need to explore much more. Expand the elementary school that we constructed in phase 1. Or build a new elementary school and high school site to hold a total of 10 sections. So that's something different than we talked about at this time. How big is the right size? How big is maybe too big? Or how big is just right ideal for the land that we have and what's available to us? How many parents and kiddos do we want come into one site? So, and then in blue again is what we would do with the other buildings there, including taking the middle school offline. One campus solution, option E. So phase 1, move the middle school. Oh, sorry. Yep. Thank you, Nick. Mr. Kent. Move the middle school and the ESC to the high school site, renovate the middle school to be a 5-section elementary school, and then take those buildings as listed offline. Phase 2, construct a new 5-section elementary school, and then move on from the buildings that those kids would now come to. And then phase 3 could be either expanding that elementary school or constructing a new one. And again, we're looking at which would likely be a larger elementary school. And then again, addressing the existing buildings that you have in the district portfolio. We want to make sure that, right, we're planning at least that if you were to move on from a building, that site would be restored and there wouldn't be a vacant building in town. Next slide.
Okay. So just a quick note on those options that were developed. We didn't set up just to move people around and move classes around and recombobulate campuses just because it would be fun. This was all driven really as an exercise in efficiency, to study efficiency. So if we develop any of these further, a really important piece of this will be understanding operationally what are those efficiencies, right? From a day-to-day annual budgeting standpoint, what are we really talking about? Because those are some pretty significant capital investments long-term to get to those. But I just wanted to put that out there that this wasn't just kind of willy-nilly. There's actually an idea of how do we consolidate and create these inherent operational efficiencies in the buildings. Okay, so moving forward. So for our work to continue to progress, we have to have a little bit of a discussion about what we just talked about and how do we refine these options moving forward. So if you could click, like, oh, it's amazing how that works. We have 2 different buckets that we want to talk about here tonight. The first is the maintenance only approach. So Devin started by showing, you know what, we have all these buildings, right? And we've talked about this before. There is an option that says we're just going to keep them all and we're going to start to tackle the maintenance. $106 million, I think, in total maintenance across all those facilities. So I guess the first question that we need just some confirmation on, because we've talked about this in our work session, is maintenance only off the table, or is this something that we want to continue to look at?
So I'm gonna wrap it in a little bit with our next agenda item, which is referendum discussion and possible referendum discussion, because this is something that goes hand in hand with that a little bit. We've been talking about operationally, we'll need to go to referendum, because we are forecasting shortfalls in the next couple of years. What we decide on the facility side, maintenance only, or going from keeping all of our buildings and maintaining them at that $106 million projected over the next 20-some years, or moving into a model of more efficient buildings that would be either new or improved buildings and reconfiguration of our structure. If you do that, you get some efficiencies, meaning we would be able to go out to operating referendum for a lower operating cost referendum than a higher operating cost referendum. That's something that we have to consider, because if we're forecasting that we're going to go into an operational referendum, you're going to hear Sarah and I come to you with two different possibilities. One that is a lower operational cost referendum, predicated on our ability to engage the public and talk about how do we get more efficient through closing some buildings and working a plan to put all of our students into more efficiently operating buildings. Or we continue to leave all of our buildings online open, but that comes with a higher operational cost because we can't reduce staffing sizes and everything else because how it would just not make sense. Which comes with a higher operational cost. I just wanted to put those two ideas in your head because what we choose and how we choose to move forward will impact both of those scenarios in that discussion.
Of the 106 I'm looking at here for the maintenance only, I'll say Sarah, Jared, Nick, first of all, what duration? Is it inflation adjusted? What's our current maintenance budget? And how much are we already have set aside in deferred maintenance stuff that we haven't done? How does this, I mean, is this new to the district, this 106 over 20 years or whatever the number is, or is this a surprise, Sarah, based off of what you see, based off of our budget? I just, what's our current operational budget's capacity for maintenance?
So, first of all, you said it in the statement that you said. We have deferred maintenance.
Yes, we do. How much deferred maintenance?
A good part of that $106 million is deferred. Deferred maintenance over a number of years.
Budget covers no maintenance at all.
No, that's not true.
That's okay.
That's not true.
I didn't think, I'm asking how much is in our budget for maintenance?
But our ability to keep up on maintenance outweighs our ability to budget for it.
I believe you. So, how much is our currently spending on maintenance?
It would be more like 400,000 a year, and that's including purchases, vehicle
Correct.
purchases, that's our total.
Current is 400,000 a year in current budget.
So to answer your question or where you're going, I think is no matter what, we're going to need some kind of a facilities referenda in our near future.
That is where I'm going.
The question that we're asking is, do we talk to our public about keeping up what we have, which comes with a higher operational model, or do we talk to our public about possibly reconfiguring to get into a more efficient model?
And what I wanted to clarify is the let's do nothing or let's keep on doing what we're doing doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
That's.
Yeah, you can tell by riding your car through the parking lot. That's
Generally, we're all on the same page. Deferred maintenance and doing nothing. Our current budget doesn't get us in a better situation. We can't, you know, we can't fix ourselves to success with our current budget.
No, we've been in that model too long.
I just wanted to clarify.
And just a quick note, you asked about inflation. So the numbers are projected in 2025 dollars. We have not inflated that out 20 years.
And this is a 20-year number though.
It is, yes, if we took all 20 years worth of.
In today's dollar.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other comments and questions? Greg?
I guess I look at it this way, based on the conversation that David's having about, 20 years worth of maintenance, I look at, option D, which is a single campus solution, and ultimately phase 2 costs us the maintenance portion of what we're settled with if we go status quo. Plus we get the benefit of moving towards, a single campus solution, so that might be the lowest cost option and long-term the most efficient option.
It is the lowest cost.
Yeah.
Numbers for the math person, looking at the ranges and what's there, compared to the 106.2 million. It's like, okay, that's a big chunk of change to ask, but it's a necessity. So then that doesn't get us any improvements. So looking at options A through E is what are the improvement costs? And when I look at the delta, you're gonna put that 106 in there anyway for maintenance. What's the delta, meaning what's the change? Option D is the cheapest in it. And my question in it is, do all of these options afford us the same or similar improvements to the educational structure? Is there one that's better than the other? Both are getting us somewhere, but is there a better than the other? I don't wanna put 107 million into something that's bare minimum.
Right.
Do you understand where I'm going with this? Yeah.
I think it depends on if you were considering, is it just something that's new better than something that's renovated and or expanded? If that was a case, then no, I would say they're different. Otherwise, I would say they're the same in how they're presented.
So my other question is, looking at the high school, there's a lot of land there. But that land, a lot of it's utilized as athletic fields.
Yes.
And so if we build on that land, where do those athletic fields go? Because right now, the high school baseball team has to travel. And for those varsity players that don't have their driver's license, that's difficult. Currently, we have football, soccer, lacrosse, other things there that are all grade levels, not just those of driving age. And so where are those places? Because I'm not saying that athletics should drive this, but we're displacing that. And if we're holding to traditions, where does that go? And I don't expect a solution.
Sure.
Have we thought about where that displacement is going to be?
I think that's a great point, because we need to make sure that we're thinking of the entire learning community at each one of these campuses, right? If you're bringing middle schools over to high school, that affords some other opportunities for
We
that.
also have middle school sports
But-
there too, right?
Correct.
It increases
Correct.
demand.
Correct, but it does impact those playing fields. So I mentioned assumptions. At this time, where the middle school might or could go, right, heavy caveat right there. You would have to move an athletic field. So if you move one athletic field, then more than likely that might be a domino, because perhaps the athletic fields that are closest to the existing high school, that's where they should be. So then you might be moving a practice field on top of that as well. So it's great to bring that up. The dollars for those fields are not included. Dollars for playgrounds, for little kiddos, those are included in the numbers I'm looking at.
Does this include dollars for gymnasiums? Because if we're closing down facilities where we have a gymnasium of one size or another, the elementary school, or the middle school, and we know that gym space is a premium already. If we're cutting down those, does that include building new ones?
So within, but right, if you're potentially going from 5 down to 2, would you have the same number of gym spaces? No, but they're gonna be in a different configuration. Is that gonna be more conducive to community use or less? I don't know, but it's great to hear about things that might be a priority. And I think as we begin to step into the next round of conversations, that's gonna help influence. And as we've heard already, there's a cost of doing nothing or just the maintenance. And how much does that cost? It's also a cost to, what if we do the improvements? And if the community is saying, I also, right, we need these gym spaces to support our entire community throughout the year. There's also a cost to that as well.
Yeah, and it's not just gym spaces or athletic spaces too. I'm thinking of performing spaces. I mean, we have programs at every elementary, at the middle school.
Right.
We have multiple programs between choir and band and orchestra. We have all these things where if we're removing those different spaces, we're gonna have to either structure how those are staggered or reconfigure how we handle those programs as operational.
Not necessarily, because if you're combining, you don't have 5 elementary programs anymore, you have 1.
That's what I meant. Okay, so reconfigured and operational. Yeah, that's what I meant. So,
And if I may, it's something for us to consider, whether we think about one campus or 2 campuses or whatever the solution is. It doesn't mean you have to lose the green space that you own at other sites, right? A potential solution was, or buildings, right? You could potentially keep portions of buildings if you wanted to keep, say, part of the middle school as the pool. Everybody loves operating a pool. Or the green space around that, right? So it doesn't mean you have to lose that space. It just means it's no longer potentially an operational school.
My solutions leave the pool intact. Let that be said.
Other comments, questions?
Yeah.
So, like, when I look at option B here, and it makes the assumption that we're going to provide maintenance in phase 1 to high school and middle school. But then, okay, so we're building a brand new elementary school. I guess that answers the question. We're providing the maintenance to those particular buildings right away. And providing an addition. So my question was geared towards, when we go through these solutions, my caution would be, or concern would be, why are we wouldn't be just throwing money away in the maintenance process of buildings. That's all taken into consideration in your recommendation.
We have to look at everything very strategically to ensure that you're not, or be the best stewards as possible.
Okay. But to Craig's point, the maintenance cost that's no longer required if you go to a capital improvement plan, the maintenance is presumably avoided. There's going to be some depreciation, or not quote unquote depreciation, but money you should set aside for repairs. But we touched on, or Jared, you said operational cost benefit. There is none of that in any of these numbers. If I can down from 10 second grade teachers to 8,
no,
it's not in here.
No.
I can save a bus route, it's not in here.
Purely capital costs.
This is all capital and maintenance, not operations.
Right, think bricks and mortar.
Oh, yes.
But it will have a operational question adjustment. For instance, and we don't have solid figures yet, we're still working on them here. But if we were to go to a purely operational referendum, just to keep the buildings that we're doing without the maintenance costs that you saw, 100 million, spliced over maybe 3 different capital referendum over 20%. And of course, that number will go up because we know that inflation happens. For our next referendum over a course of 4 years, operationally, we would be around about $8 million a year ask probably to try to keep that same amount that we have right now.
Operation, or
Right?
okay.
You know, to try to keep us going for the next 4 or 5 years, right? If we scale back and we start with the predication that in the next year, we have to go to a capital referendum to get it to a more efficient model, right? We have to start one of these phases. We can take that $8 million to around 5 probably, right? But what that is on a continuing mill rate is a big difference, right? And over time, you save money
that you put in, because you're not having to do a lot of maintenance on the upfront, so you get some more, aspect of change there, but it does really help us in what that looks like, and it certainly, can do some balancing on the board.
So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know you have a heavy agenda and we've got a couple more things to talk about. Back to the slide that's on the screen right now. We started with the question, is maintenance only an option to carry forward? Or are we really moving our conversation to around something on the right side where it's maintenance and improvements?
So my opinion, when you look at maintenance only, if we did maintenance only, we're gonna be stuck with, what, 5 buildings that are pushing 100 years old or older, and we've maintained them, and now what other challenges are popping up that we didn't know about? If we go to a maintenance plus improvement plan, in the long run, I honestly think we can save money in the long run, because we have buildings that are no longer 100 years old that we're trying to maintain. I see an expert in the room here too that's probably maintained a couple 100-year-old buildings, and it's not a cheap endeavor at all. So that's fine.
To your point, should point out the average age for schools in the state of Wisconsin is 49 years.
Yeah, so bouncing off of what you were talking about with maintenance costs, am I correct in perceiving that even like taking schools offline, you're already reducing the amount that you're putting in for maintenance just by doing that, because it's 5 million versus, I don't know, versus like 11 to 15 million, so you're already, dropping that down.
Correct.
I'm not hearing a lot of discussion in favor of maintenance only. I think that we can move forward with the maintenance plus improvement.
So I think it gives us some direction. I'm not sensing a strong preference here tonight, one campus versus two, unless I'm just not.
So question on that, when you say one campus versus two, what is the difference if you have an updated at the high school and then you build an elementary north of the tree line?
Yep.
Is that 2 campus? Is that 1 campus?
1 campus.
Okay, so what's the distinction? If you have a certain amount of miles between them, what is that?
No.
It's either having the high school only, or it's the high school and the middle school, Riverside.
Sites.
Correct. That's what we're talking about. So basically is the middle school going to the high school, so we have a 6-12 campus, and then over on what is Riverside right now, you would have 2 elementary school buildings, or one of those elementaries is over at the high school, so that you have an elementary on both kind of sides of
So
town, if you
you
will.
would eventually be downsizing all of the elementaries into either the middle school site and the high school site. That's your 2-site option.
Correct.
Or your 1-site option is everything eventually ends up in that 100 acres.
Yes.
At the high school.
Yep.
There was one provision in one of the options that allowed for us to search out available land in the southwestern part of our school district.
Correct.
Because until we really get the information from our population study for offers in September, we don't know, but we do know from the planning commission in town and some of the things that they're talking about, any further development that's happening that way right now. It's not happening at all this other. So, if we were to want to seek out something, it would be in the southwest part of our district. But again, we have enough land, we don't necessarily need to do that right now. But that may be a future option that we would have to go towards.
Great.
I mean, I've been an advocate for one campus, moving toward a one campus solution all the entire time. I think that, you're gonna have intrinsic benefits that you're probably not gonna notice right away when it comes to, being able to be more efficient with your maintenance staff, busing, being able to just snowblowing, trying to clear a parking lot when your staff is all in one place, not running all over the city, trying to clear snow. Stuff with administration, like, if
you only need one principal at your elementary schools. Obviously, you're gonna have a little more than that, you know, custodial staff, your other shared resources. I mean, those are going to net the district some savings.
Yeah, I guess, just for the off chance that a $250 million capital referendum fails. I mean, I know it's really far out there, but just on the off chance. In order for this board or for you to make a recommendation, I mean, whether it is, I'm not just the maintenance, the teachers, the busing, the resale and putting these properties back on the tax rolls. How much macroeconomics do you put into this that say, hey, yeah, this is what we really want, but you're not gonna be able to afford it. Why don't we go K-6 in 4 middle schools and in 4 elementary schools, push the middle school to the high school and put on a $15 million addition, and maybe we can get that $25 million referendum pushed through, because we're not gonna get the 250. And I don't wanna go through every single possible scenario tonight, although I do. You presented us 5 options. There's 100.
Correct.
And how do you help us narrow in on the one that's gonna be most palatable to our shareholders? Because I don't see 250 happening.
And I didn't put that softball up for you guys for step 4, but.
Do you want to hit that?
Sure, and I think there are a couple ways to answer your question. I think one way to answer your question is actually the second way I'm going to do so. But, you know, I think that's why, you know, tonight it's been great to hear your conversation and to start to get some feedback around affirming maintenance and improvements. And then, you know, I think this is, if my former teacher self had a chalkboard or a whiteboard right now, I would have drawn a funnel. And at the top would be this first one about how many campuses. If we start to hear from the board, we really want to explore one campus, that starts to give us feedback to move in a direction that helps to get at some of the detail you're looking for, right? And then the same thing, if we were to hear it's not one campus, right? Because maybe people decide we want to look at 2, or maybe we still want to look at both options of 1 or 2, then we're still developing out based on what you're talking about, kind of those pieces. So I think hearing what you're giving us so far this evening is helpful, but more refining is what we're going to need to really be able to set you up with a level of detail, and then continuing to partner with your staff to get at those operational efficiencies and modeling what, for instance, option A would maybe offer, you know, in fiscal efficiencies, or the same with B, C, and D, as best you can project. Because while I appreciate the $250 million question, I think we were all probably seeing it as some phasing for various reasons. One is cost. 2 is to allow, one of the toughest parts of school construction, as I know you all understand very well, is that we're trying to, you know, proverbially build the ship while we're sailing it, right? So we can't just shut down school for a year. It's nice to have phasing to allow for some of those strategic moves. And again, charged with your, one of your big parameters to us was really to figure out how do we help support the district maintaining fiscal efficiencies as quickly as possible. And really the way to do that is to look at some of those buildings where you can gain that by starting to concentrate, particularly the elementary school, and whether that's bringing some of those programs, keeping them, you know, like Devin was sharing, there's so many different awesome ways this can, you know, play out based upon what the community would like to see. So go ahead.
Is a 2-phase model, or is a 2-campus model a phase that you could go through to get to a 1-phase or 1-campus model?
Absolutely.
You could?
Yeah, you could.
I think you have a lot of, right, because we're talking about such a long time frame.
Right.
It's really like, we're just getting the general direction, and then you could be able to go either way at the time, right? You're letting time and your constituents tell you what the direction is.
The only hesitancy I have with a phased approach like that, especially if we want to, you know, go to the 2 campus and then go to 1 campus, is I don't want us to build something new that is a stopgap and then we're not going to have for the long haul. If we're going to build something new, that should be where we're going to be. That's our end. And if that's, we're going to add on to the high school, and that's where the middle school's gonna go for the foreseeable future, fine. But I don't want us to build a five stop middle or elementary at the middle school. And then 10 years from now, say, okay, now we're gonna go build a 10,
Right.
section middle school, elementary at the high school.
So what you were alluding to is, where we are now is coming to the conclusion of what we've asked PRA to do, which is to go through a facility study, bring new ideas and options. If we want to continue, if you want to click,
Thank you.
one more. We wanna talk about next steps. We will talk about how we get there, but, in our RFP process, stages 1 through 3, we're engaged with PRA. Stages 4 and 5, we're not, because we wanted to know where we were going in the end. Because if it was maintenance only, we kind of knew, but it sounds like you're gonna go past that. So I'm gonna be recommending in the future that we continue in the stage 4 with them. That will come at a cost, and you'll see that, but it'll go through the stages of going fiscal and then come to you and so on. But if we're interested in that, we need to share with PRA our interests, and depending on our timeline, they may need to get going sooner than later on some of these things. So I'll leave that to you to discuss what stage 4 looks like and next steps into possibly stage 5. But that's for you guys.
Do you want to?
Before we hit that real quick, I just want to add one other bullet point that's up here. There's another piece of the team that we'll be talking about as we go forward, and that is the potential engagement with a construction manager. Won't spend a lot of time on it tonight, but there may be a question, why would you engage a construction manager? We don't even know what we're going to build. This is not a general contractor, this is not a builder, this is a construction manager. And this is often a team member that we will engage with in school districts to help us understand better real-time market pricing, logistics around phasing, how we actually implement things. So if we're going to renovate, expand, move, what are construction timelines? This is not bidding out trades, this is not construction, this is another advisor that comes as part of the team. So we'll have more conversations around that as we likely, I think, move forward in this process. But we want to put it out there that we will be talking more about that.
Right, and that's exciting and a real nice segue, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, please. Because oftentimes a construction manager brought in close to where we are now or in the near future helps a lot with, it brings them up to speed on the process, right? So then they have all the background information as we're going forward, not just as a trusted advisor, but they also often have a team that helps support communications and community engagement. So listed on here is step 4, which is survey. And I just want to call out that really we focus on community feedback with that. We have a lot of S's, as you'll see in all 5, but realistically, community feedback is what we're after. So survey can mean a lot of different things. It can mean everything from working with the district to host focus groups. It can be doing community conversations just to bring people, the whole community, up to speed, almost like we did tonight, right? On where have we been, where are we going? It can be also, oftentimes districts will contract with a third-party provider to do a community-wide survey. So that could happen at different phases of where we are now versus in the future. A lot of people end up putting a question to the community in the form of a survey that gets at tax tolerance. Do you think this is the right long-range plan for the district? What kind of phasing might you be comfortable with? Really to advise the board and administration on making some of those decisions. But also it could be used preemptively just in general before you would get to that point, you know, because we may have enough time and a runway to consider doing more than just one survey prior to the board choosing to put a referendum on the ballot if that would be the board's choice. So we would love to continue to work with your district. It's such an exciting time. It's an exciting process. You have many opportunities ahead to celebrate. We got a chance to be a part of the strategic planning work early on and also to listen to your discussion tonight, and really do want to support the direction through this process that you're headed as a district, and make sure that your building and grounds can support exactly what it is you hope to fully realize through your strategic plan. questions for us.
Questions? Great.
Great. It's, I guess I'd like to see, does it make sense to make a decision right this second when it comes to moving forward with any of these particular options?
I don't think we're looking for that. I think it's more of a general discussion on moving forward with PRA and keep that discussion going. We have to have the community feedback.
Right.
Before we narrow in on any of the specific ones. I think the biggest question we would have for the community right now is 2 campus versus 1 campus. And seeing how that feels. So I think there's a larger discussion, throughout the funnel. I think we're still near the top there.
No, I agree with you, but I just, at some point, I just wanna know if we're not just putting a cart before the horse. To try to even understand feedback from the community first, that whether or not there's been any type of appetite to move forward with any type of idea like this.
Well, that would be a good starting question. Hey, do we even wanna look at this? If you're like, no, keep what you got. And then we have to, back and look at what we have. I think looking at, if we take the litmus of the community of thinking, we're looking at changing things around. Maybe they don't want to have us have anything to do with Riverside because of the whole situation with parking and driving and picking up and dropping off there. Like, look, let's just get rid of that and let's move on. But we don't know that. I think that's part of that larger discussion is start with those big questions and then you continue to refine it.
Yeah. So to kind of continue blending both agenda items, because they fit really well together. Moving forward on our timeline for referendum, we know that within about 3 years, we're going to be at a shortfall with our fund balance. We're already operating under a shortfall each year until we get there. The reason our fund balance is where it is because the last referendum and our ability to really be fiscally responsible within that last referendum. Some of the federal dollars that came in COVID, some of the federal expenses that came in COVID, all of these things, right, over the last few years have put us in a good position, and we can extend it out for the next 2 to 3 years, right? But in 3 years, that's going to be gone. So we would like to engage the community on talking about what operational referendum looks like in the future. If you want to go to a more, one of these options that would take instead of putting dollars towards maintenance and put them to capital improvements, that's going to come with a higher cost tag on the capital improvement side, which means for us, more for Sarah in the business office, but for us administratively, we've got to come up with a solution that's more balanced, which means we would be asking for a smaller operating referendum to start. And if the community says, we know that that's going to happen because the next year we're going to then go into that capital phase to start phase 1, we know our answer. If the answer is no, we don't support going into a capital phase, we like our buildings the way they are, we just want you to maintain them, then we have to say to the public, then we need to go up for a higher operational cost, because it's a lot more expensive to operate these older buildings and in the configuration they are, than it would be to get to a 1 or 2 campus. So all of that's going to come. And all of that discussion has happened between now and basically November, early December, because you have to have a resolution for April, no matter what.
So what you're suggesting is that really we have an option to really go to phase 4 with Terry at this point, because we need to get those answers.
I'm saying if you choose to look at the possibility of going into a different configuration, yeah, we need to get PRA continuing their work. If you say, no, hold on, wait, time out, we just need some time to talk about this, then I'm gonna tell you, that's fine, but you know then we're gonna have to ask for a higher operating referendum. That will give us the time to have those conversations, because we'll stay in the old model. Okay? Or I shouldn't say old model, the current model that we're in, right? And that's fine, but again, I need you to know, and I need our public to know, either way, we have money that's an operational need. It's gonna be a higher cost operation if we stay in the configuration we're in. And then a lower capital maintenance question, or we're gonna go with a higher capital maintenance question and a lower operating question, right? And those won't be at the same time, right? We're not gonna put them up on the same ballot with each other. And the reason I know that is because in working with Baird, what we've done so far, Baird would suggest we go out to operational referendum this April. But we have to decide which model we're gonna look at. And then whatever we do with capital, will come in 26. And the reason it comes better in 26 is because we have some debt falling off, and that will equalize the mill rate for people a little bit better. Okay, and so advantageously, Baird would say, let's put it there. Otherwise, our public is going to see a huge increase and then a drop off in that instead of just a level or mill rate, which would be more advantageous for the consumer, me being one of them. I don't want to see the tax go, and that, I just want to just keep them a little bit more level. Okay, now, I can't say they will be exactly level, because if we go with one of the phases that has a really large capital, there's only so much we can do on the operational side. We can't go lower than some of those numbers I've been talking about. Like, we just can't. We are operationally behind schedule, which is why we're capitally behind schedule of maintenance and curriculum work and others. We've been doing deferment on more than just capital. We've been deferring curriculum, we've been deferring professional development and other things too.
Quick question, that we've got, 2 and 3 phase plans here, but we could break this up into multiple phases. We could have,
Yes.
8 capital phases in smaller increments. And there's a lot of different ways we can do this. It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 day projects.
And that's part of that next phase of development, refining it further.
This was intended to be responsive to the board, trying to see what that biggest fiscal efficiency impact upfront could look like with combining some bigger phases.
Right, so looking around, I'm sensing the board is looking to go ahead with the maintenance plus improvement, starting to look towards phase 4, which would begin, to Gerald's point, reduce the operational ask in April with an eye towards a 2026 for a capital ask. And what that capital ask will look like will be dependent on the details between now and then.
And as per our policies, we'll be bringing to you what phase 4 costs and pricings look like. It's not gonna change from what they gave us earlier in the RFP, but because it's above $20,000, we'll share that with you. And then we'll be able to do that in September, as well as a resolution in September to formally move forward. But until then, we'll just keep the ball rolling for this year.
Let's see, you're shaking your head, so acclamation to the board, we'll go forward with that. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Go sit down.
Where?
We can skip.
We can probably skip item F unless you have questions just in general on referendum, but I think I covered where we are. Basically, regardless, we're going to have 2 different asks. We're going to have an operational ask and a capital ask. Depending on where we go, it's going to be different. But Sarah and I, mostly Sarah, we're going to put together numbers for you as to what those look like. I will tell you though, if we go for a small operational ask, that is going to be coming with some budgetary cuts. Our administrative staff already knows that for next year's school budget, not this one that we're entering into next week. But 25-26 budget, we're asking the administration to cut $500,000. And we will be doing that over the next 3 years. Cut $1.5 million operationally over the next 3 years. The only way that we can get around that is if we were to just stay in the same model that we're in and just really ask for operational what we need to do. But in order to get to some of the capital dollars, we have to reduce some of the mill rate for them. And more than $500,000 a year will be a big impact to the school district. Even $500,000 is going to be a huge impact, but we know that we have to make some more steps to getting fiscally conservative. Because if we're going to be asking for more mill rate without doing anything, that I think is disingenuous. There are some things that we can do to try to help myself and other taxpayers in the district to make sure that we can still offer good programming, but at a rate that we can afford.
All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, which would be our reports. We'll start with the superintendent report. Jerry, you don't get the full 20 minutes here.
Full 20 minutes, what? Okay, I'll go as quickly as possible. So just a picture of us at the administrative retreat was held over at the collective building. It was a great space. Again, we got to talk about the incoming year and what we're looking at, so that's just very good. Also, quick, see how it works. We're gonna be trying to do it myself. So I don't want to even use this. I want you to know the new opportunity, a celebration. We've got another grant, $10,000 in the Open Educational Resources Grant. This is going to be focusing around increasing agricultural and educational literacy in lessons from early childhood, age 3 through grade 3. And we're going to kick that event off in October, and it will coincide with Wisconsin's Science Festival Week. But they work really, really hard at me to try to find every resource they can. You saw that in other slides, and I just thought it was a good celebration to talk about that. Opportunities. We, of course, heard this earlier that we went through our 4th community strategic planning group session that was on July 23rd. Again, there was so many people there in attendance, 53 were in attendance. Of those 4 were new attendees even at the last meeting. I will tell you that one of the greatest things that brought joy to my heart was in that meeting, we gave a message, we videotaped a message to staff, just sharing with them how much support the community has for them and the process. And I know this, in the end, not everybody was happy with all of the outcomes, but in the end, I can say this, we really had feedback from everybody. And in the end, we will serve all those we serve in the way we serve them. And we will keep to look at new ways to serving them in a better way. And we will have a continuous improvement plan when we get there. That speaks to tradition, innovation, and transformation. And that truly is our journey. Click back to school. Online registration opened on July 29th. So far, as of this morning, we had 2,470 students that began their registration process or completed it. We just want to remind families that that process is still open, and we know there's still students out there who need to sign up. More information can be found on our webpage, and so this is just one more kind of public announcement time to do that. So the opportunity is back to school is here next week. Welcome back is tomorrow for staff, August 27th. That will be at the high school. Lunch is going to be served from our awesome and amazing food service staff. They're going to be preparing our lunch this year from 11:30 to 12:30 in the Commons. And then afterwards, the ceremony will begin where we celebrate staff on their years of experience, anywhere from 1 year of experience to 40 years of experience. And staff will participate in all safety school training, facilitated by our Watertown Police Department after that celebration. Also, as part of our administrative retreat, we talked about topics related to the strategic plan, educator effectiveness. This is where we talk about not only our staff and how we evaluate our teachers and how their performances, but we talk about how we evaluate our performance and talking about how we're changing up
how we're going to be evaluating our principals, to be in line with the building goals and other things, and how we're going to use that process to really continue on our continuous improvement journey. I shared with them at that time too, that you as a board are also engaging in an educator effectiveness when it comes to evaluating me, and how you're strengthening that evaluation with me, and how we discuss that evaluation, and how we can get to continuous improvement through my employment with you and your direction as to how I get better with how I lead. And then we also talked about and participated in something that we call the Goose Chase. Goose Chase was basically a get to know your community and get to know each other better. Scavenger hunt that went around and had us going around with our cell phones. You may have seen us on the rooftop of the building, taking scenic pictures and so on. Yes, we had to try to convince people to do that. My team actually convinced Peg at the library to let us on the roof and just a picture. But we had a whole bunch of other things where we had to answer or find historical markers and other things just to get to know our community better as those we serve. So it was just really fun activity. Some of those pictures there on the left are from the Goose Chase, and we just had a really great time getting to know each other and our community better. That's some important reminders for you. First day of school, middle school and high school, it starts September 3rd. Elementary has Ready Set Go conferences scheduled for the 3rd and 4th. The first full day of elementary school is on September 5th. We've got committee meetings listed there. The one that you need to be aware of is fiscal management, had to change date and time to September 16th, and it's to be determined. The time is yet to be determined. So I guess there was some attendance that had changed that day. So, any questions?
Right.
That's not time off in the 20 minutes.
Next up, we have our committee reports. Again, I encourage everyone, try to be brief and summation. We're all mostly at those committee meetings and we spend enough time there already. Ed Services.
Sure. Ed Services met on August 13th. All committee members were present, plus others. The discussions that day are going to result in 3 resolutions today. One was to adopt a special education procedure, which is more or less a copy of the DPI procedure, but if you have questions on that, there's notes, and Sarah can update you on that. Jason Bull gave a good update on the Wisconsin Guarantee program, which is different than the direct commit. Notes are in the minutes. Jenny began what would be the curriculum review cycle, i.e. when we're going to look at math, when we're going to look at social studies, science, et cetera, in all the grades. No resolution, but we're going to revisit that, I believe, in the first quarter again, just to make sure that we're still on pace, as much as it leads into the budget for the following year when approvals have to be made to purchase curriculum. So we want to make sure we line those two up. And then we have the draft assessment plan and the Renaissance contract that will result. Mostly that was just an update, but there's a couple of small resolutions for the STAR assessment and the Fast Bridge assessment, which will be later on the agenda tonight. And then lastly, we spent most of our time on the Panorama contract. And although there were several benefits to it, there were also several, I don't want to call them unknowns or concerns, but they're the general timber of the subcommittee was that we could probably do better or do better for less. And therefore, since we're not in a position as a subcommittee to make a decision, we put an agenda item on tonight's for a approval for a non-renewal. So a yes vote means we won't be renewing Panorama. Otherwise, there'd be no way to get the vote to the board. And we as a committee can't make a decision like that without the full input from the board. And we adjourned at 10 o'clock. Next meeting is on September 10th.
All right. Next up is fiscal.
I shared that for Fred as payback for missing June and July. Fred was absent. All other committee members were present. Actually, Mike was, sorry, Mike, what did I say? Fred was absent. Sorry, Mike was absent. There were no purchases over 20,000, but one was close to it, and that was the Apogee Rooms system, which is a communication software. for teachers, parents, students, staff. And there's still a little bit more information that we're gonna get on that. I think that, Melissa was going to bring some information on that either to the next fiscal and or to the full board, depending on where that's at. However, it doesn't require board approval. It's just one of those, hey, we should let you know because it's close to 20. Otherwise, there were several updates from Kevin and others, visitor management system, the D&H transportation contract, which Parents Rightways is going to be a resolution tonight. And then we also, as is part of the course, look at the budget and the fiscal management calendar. And then there was no questions on the monthly expenditures. Adjourned relatively quickly compared to other subcommittees. And the next meeting on that is September 16th.
All right, HR.
We met on Monday, August 19th. Some of the big items that we had, excuse me. We had the 2025 health insurance renewal. We did spend a good amount of time as far as Al Yeager, representative, let us know that there was a 9% renewal rate. I know we were looking to, just from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, we wanted it to be closer to 7, so you will see a resolution tonight in what our recommendation is to be able to mitigate some of those things, kept the company itself the same, but you'll see that there's a small modification in deductible and then also employee contribution. We do also have a consent agenda. As far as that goes, we're looking good, thanks to Margaret and her team's work, and everybody who's been hiring, things like that, we're looking good going into the school year. We did also take a look at the preliminary exit and turnover report. If you want to see the details of that, you can go ahead and go back to the HR committee meeting. There's charts. The employee satisfaction survey action plan, as far as that goes, that we have recommended one of the items coming out to address student behavior. And so Sarah O provided us with some details as far as the process and the plan to be able to address those things, because that was one of the #1 concerns on the employee satisfaction survey. Start of the school year, you're all invited tomorrow as board members to welcome staff. With future meeting planning, we did go into closed session. You will also see a resolution regarding that tonight. I believe it's resolution E regarding that. As far as our next action items, Margaret will come with we got the one theme for the employee satisfaction survey. We had previously talked about maybe 2 or 3, so we're going to come with a document as far as that goes. And then we have the resolutions. And we'll also be, it's number 5. We'll prepare a board resolution for the educator compensation on the certification. Oh, okay, all right, there you go. Our next meeting is September 16th.
All right, planning.
It was not our meeting for our month to meet this month. We had 2 subcommittee meetings, one of which we discussed the mission and vision, which you heard about earlier tonight. And the other one was a very short, under 30-minute meeting, just talking about 3 possible budget scenarios, looking at referendum. There we go, wham bam. Next meeting, September 11th. Policy.
We met Wednesday, August 14th, and number 4 all the committee members were there, plus Diana, Sam, and Oden, and Margaret, and as well as Yul Vetter, our attorney. Yes. So the administrator, we discussed a little bit about the administrative guidelines regarding transgender students. A draft was provided for the administrative procedural guidelines regarding transgender students. There was concern by the committee that there was not a mother policy to this particular policy. And we had a discussion regarding that.
You mean administrative guideline, there's not a policy, the administrative guideline rolls up to?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Wasn't sure what another policy was.
I didn't want to say comparative policy, because the next discussion point was that we agreed to accept the parental rights portion of the guidelines. But however, felt there was more work that needed to be needed on the rest of the guidelines. The committee also would like to see a second version of guidelines to compare with the draft. So those two versions would be placed in front of the board at some point to determine which direction we want to go. So that will be brought back to the committee during the September meeting. Then we also discussed the non-discrimination, equal employment opportunities and staff ethics. So we decided that we still need to do a little bit of digging regarding First Amendment rights in that component, specifically pertaining to compelled speech. And that in conjunction with recent Supreme Court rulings, all those would impact both that particular policy as well as the transgender guidelines. The committee also discussed staff ethics, and that is also on your agenda tonight. That we would be replacing the Neola bullet points with the district, the previous district's policy on the code of ethics for our staff. There was a question about drug-free workplace and removing verbiage from that particular policy. It was determined by the committee to accept the policy as it is, to first read for tonight, with that language stricken. The employment of the superintendent, there was just some confusion on that that needed to be clarified. That's also coming before us tonight. Then we had two groups in the Neola policies, policy group 3000 and group 4000, that you'll see on the agenda for first read.
Zero harsh ingredients.
A number of policies for first and second read. If you have a chance to go through them, that would be great. Our next meeting is September 9th, Monday, September 9th at 5:30.
Right. Next item on the, is the consent agenda. This includes the minutes, committee summaries, personnel staffing, the first and second read policies. I noticed there are no bills to approve this time around. Well, they didn't approve the bills. It wasn't any theirs. All right, so do I have a motion to approve? So moved. Motion by Tina, seconded by Craig. Comments, questions, discussion on any of the items in the consent agenda? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson? Yes. Sam Alvino?
Yes.
David Schrader?
Yes.
Dan Bolger?
Yes.
Craig Morgan?
Yes.
Mike Higgins?
Yes.
Lori Collins?
Yes.
Fred Yant?
Yes.
Diana Johnson?
Yes.
The motion passes. Next item, we have our action items, the first of which is the WSD special education procedures. Can I get a motion?
So
Second.
Motion by David, second by Diana. Comments or questions on this one? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Yes.
Oh,
Sorry.
Yes. Sam Alvino?
Yes.
David Schrader?
Yes.
Dan Bolger?
yes.
Craig Morgan?
Yes.
Mike Higgins?
Yes.
Lori Collins?
Yes.
Fred Yant?
Yes.
Diana Johnson?
Yes.
Oh, should only that. Okay, so the next is the resolution for the discontinuation of the Panorama Education Student Survey, as David pointed out. This is to discontinue, if you vote yes, will mean that we will not continue using Panorama. Can I get a motion, please? Motion by Sam, second by Dan. Comments, questions? Tina?
So by discontinuing this, that means that the staff needs to come up with something different, or what does it mean? So the staff brought this forward as recommendation, as a recommendation. And so this states that we're not, this is not taking the recommendation of the staff and they will need to come up with something different.
That's accurate.
Okay.
Other comments, questions? Roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson? No. Sam Allen?
Yes.
David Schrader?
Yes.
Dan Bolger?
Yes.
Craig Wortman?
Yes.
Mike Higgins?
Yes.
Lori Collins?
Yes.
Fred Yant?
Yes.
Diana Johnson?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next item is the truancy abatement officer contract. Motion. Motion by Tina. Second. Second by Sam. Comments, questions? Roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson?
Yes.
Sam Allen?
Yes.
David Schrader?
Yes.
Dan Bolger?
Yes.
Craig Wortman?
Yes.
Mike Higgins?
Yes.
Lori Collins?
Yes.
Fred Yant?
Yes.
Diana Johnson?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next item up is the school resource officer contracts. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Craig, second by Dan. Comment?
This supports the current resource school officers that we have, school and high school. I am working with the city, at, Ossipel Elementary Resource Officer. It's in the very, initial stages of city budget. And of course, the city budget goes on the calendar year, not the school year. Sarah and I are putting in, a temporary hold in our budget for a half year, because that's what we want to fix our budget. But if it does pass the city's allotment, I will be coming back to you for a half year of elementary resource officer, but we are setting aside money in the budget to do that. If we don't do that, then we can be allocated to ours. Working jointly, we've been talking about that over the last couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll have data and everything else to bring to you about the why and whatever, I just want you to know. If any of you hear some of that that's happening with the city, and you're wondering what you're passing, I want you to understand what you're passing tonight. And you're passing the key positions that we have currently.
Consider the success we've had of expanding the resource officer to the middle school. It's good direction.
It's again, not for discussion tonight, but just want you to know what you're going on.
So comment or question on this? Any others? Roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson? Yes. Sam Allen?
Yes.
David Schrader?
Yes.
Dan Bolger?
Yes.
Craig Wortman?
Yes.
Mike Higgins?
Yes.
Lori Collins?
Yes.
Fred Yant?
Yes.
Diana Johnson?
Yes.
All right, next is certification adjustment for speech and language pathologists. This came out of the HR committee. And just to clarify on this, did you want to make a statement on this one? Or you want me just to read that here?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, there's the recommended action, and then you'll notice that there is also a piece of administrative content as well.
Okay, can we get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Tina, second by Diana. Comments or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson? Yes. Sam Allen?
Yes.
David Schrader?
Yes.
Dan Bolger?
Yes.
Craig Wortman?
Yes.
Mike Higgins?
Yes.
Lori Collins? Fred Yant?
Yes.
Diana Johnson?
Yes.
And the motion carries. Next item up is the health insurance renewal plan design change. Can I get a motion?
Second.
Motion by Tina, second by Diana. Comments or questions on this? Roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson? Yes. Sam Allen?
Yes.
David Schrader?
Yes.
Dan Bolger?
Abstain.
Craig Wortman,
Abstain.
Mike Higgins,
Yes.
Lori Holland,
Yes.
Fred Yant,
Yes.
Diana Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries. Last item up for tonight is the purchase of STAR assessment and Fast Bridge assessment through Renaissance Learning. Oh, I apologize, I jumped ahead, right? Quicker. So, the next item up is the D&H Enterprises contract.
So moved.
Motion by second, second by Sam. Comments or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson.
Yes.
Sam O'Neill,
Yes.
David Schrader,
Yes.
Dan Bolton.
Yes.
Craig Wortman.
Yes.
Mike Higgins.
Yes.
Lori Holland.
Yes.
Fred Yant,
Yes.
Diana Johnson.
Yes.
The motion carries. Last one for the night, purchase of STAR assessment and Fast Bridge assessment through Renaissance Learning.
So
Motion by David. Second by Dan. Comments or questions on this? Roll call vote, please.
Tina Johnson.
Yes.
Sam O'Neill,
Yes.
David Schrader,
yes.
Dan Bolton,
Yes.
Craig Wortman.
Yes.
Mike Higgins.
Yes.
Lori Holland.
Yes.
Fred Yant,
Yes.
Diana Johnson.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everybody. This brings us to the second of our two public comment sections for the night. If you have multiple or make comments that you want to make, please go pile on, but come up and address, be sure to sign in so we have a record of that. State your name and address for the record, please.
Stacy Estudio, Main Street, Watertown. I too, as a taxpayer, am concerned about my money in the district. My children are minority children, Spanish-speaking home, and they want to be able to go to the locker rooms and the bathrooms and be respected. My girls also have a right to feel safe in school, have a right to go to the bathroom, have a right to take a shower and change their clothes. And this whole the inclusive part is excluding the majority of the children. So trying to rewrite policies for a small percentage when you're excluding the majority just doesn't make sense. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead, from wherever you are, if you like.
Okay, Christy Schusterman, 201 South Water Street, Watertown. Inclusion isn't just a word, it's a lifestyle. It has nothing to do with politics, and I don't care what political side you're on. Inclusion means everyone is involved. Growing up with a disability, it was hard to feel included all the time. But I had parents and educators who fought for me, such as our voice, and making accommodations to the schools so that I could fully participate. If we discount the word inclusion, it creates a loophole for people to not actually practice and follow it. For marginalized groups of people who are already living in a world that wasn't made for them, let's not make ignorance easier by excluding such a meaningful word. Inclusion only happens if we actually focus on making it happen. Please put yourself in people's shoes and think about how you would feel if a part of your identity wasn't acknowledged.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mike Cedarburg, Hilltop Road, Watertown, Wisconsin. It's real interesting to hear because I think one of the biggest themes or concerns that the public has is bullying. And we had a bullying update today. And what's the definition of bullying? And I was interested that it said imbalance of power is a definition of bullying between harassment and bullying. And then I was interested to hear that one of your major goals is empathy. I would like to just mention that empathy can be a slippery slope.
what are you basing or building your empathy on? What are you basing it on? Because the rise of bullying could be found in your definition of what is bullying. The 27 class has a rise in bullying, is that correct? Maybe it can be found in what your definition of bullying is. Are you considering the child's non-compliance of forced pronoun confessions? This is a classic bullying of a Christian child. If you define imbalance of power as the delineating quality between harassment and bullying, what bigger power stands against a small child or a young adult or a teacher, for that matter, than the school board or other adults gathering together and defining that you must use pronouns, that when somebody looks and says, no, I don't agree with that because of my faith or my values, that's bullying, the core foundational values. Would a Muslim child even be forced to do that? The other bullying that a young Christian girls can be subject to is the allowance of biologically and scientifically defined males to use the girls' bathroom or locker room. Consider this: a young girl is coming in to comb her hair, and a young man comes into the bathroom. How is she going to feel? Her privacy is lost. Her comfort is lost. Is that an injury? I would say. Plus, that young man is physically more powerful than that young girl is, as we've seen in the Olympics, if you can remember that. And what is more significant than powers that has been given to him, that young man, and the permission to invade her privacy comes from your decision. You have that decision to either remove his permission or to allow his permission to enter into that bathroom and invade that young girl's privacy. Just know that bullying goes both ways when you begin to redefine reality. Due to empathy, will you allow Christian children and teachers, or even Muslim traditional value holders, to be bullied and make them deny their faith, their values, their common sense by forcing them to use pronouns not scientifically and biologically true? Think of that young child who sees, and then he's not supposed to believe what he sees. That's bullying, and that's quite detrimental to the mindset of the children. Will you allow your empathy to cause and bully a young woman, not only Christian, but also Muslim or Jewish, or young ladies that just don't agree with this forced privilege and favoritism to be forced to share a bathroom or a locker room with male students? Empathy.
Sir, if you can wrap it up, please.
What's that?
Okay, wrap it up, please.
Yep. Lastly, I think we can see it all in our world today. Did any of you see the Olympic opening ceremony? Was that bullying of Christians? I think so.
Thank you. And we'll go to the next question.
Good evening. My name is Jim Drinwater, resident of Watertown. I've spoken at multiple school board meetings. I had a couple things written down before. I'm kind of going to throw that in the garbage for right now. I want to talk about a couple things. So first and foremost, we just heard an awful lot about hypothetical bullying situations that happen in our schools. Here's real bullying that happens in our schools. My daughter getting called a dyke in school. That didn't get reported. That's not even part of your statistic because she doesn't feel included. She doesn't feel like anything is going to happen about it. She doesn't feel like her diversity matters because our school board has decided to go against what our community got together and said was important. We saw the core values there of empathy. Yeah, I remember that slide from being at that strategic planning meeting. And diversity and inclusivity were on some of those core beliefs. And they had some of the highest votes in that slide. I was there, many of you were there. I know because I saw you there. I know because you were at my table and spoke with me. I know because you spoke with me personally after the meeting. I remember you were there, and so you know that when we all stood there and gave our input to the draft vision statement, only 2 tables had anything negative to say about it in any way, shape, or form. One of those tables had someone who participated who felt like they got steamrolled over by the other people that were at the table because we hadn't done an icebreaker to separate people out based on their beliefs. It's ridiculous. I am beyond upset and I'm beyond disappointed in every single person who's going to sit here and abide this. This is ridiculous. I sacrificed my time. Many other people in this room sacrificed their time. I have to be in less than 6 hours because I've sat here to give you my opinion. I have given my opinion at other school board meetings. I've given it at the strategic planning meetings, and I'm done. You want me to vote yes on a referendum to fund these schools? I'll be damned before I vote yes on any referendum for a school board that's not going to support my children. My children. I'm done.
My name is Linda O'Neill. I'm from Watertown. I would like to thank the board for keeping our district goals so far neutral and free of radical political ideologies. I feel really bad about this because I've worked in the schools. I've worked with special needs kids. I love them. I love the students. I don't even have animosity to the people in the front row here. My heart broke for the one lady's testimony. I feel really bad about this, and I think that there's a fundamental problem here with definitions. We kind of like to reiterate that small groups of unelected people at the strategic meetings, even if they are the majority in that room, should not decide the overarching goals in place of thousands of voters with an opposing view who want a legitimate election. The meetings produce data partly from faulty data collection methods, such as QR surveys, and I've said this before, that could be filled out numerous times by anyone anywhere. There were also sticky dots used to show support for different ideas written on chart paper. It would never be right for 36 people in the strategic meetings with dots in a special meeting to effectively override over 3,000 no DEI voters that clearly won in a legitimate election. If someone would expect that a majority of 36 in a meeting equates that they get to keep DEI in the statements, then certainly a 3,000 majority in a legitimate election voting against DEI would certainly get to keep it out of the statements. Getting DEI out of our district is what the broader community legally voted for and won. DEI was put at the bottom of the polls in Watertown, just like it has been put at John Deere, Tractor Supply, Harley-Davidson, and the University of Texas at Austin. Are we saying that those people do not want inclusion? For handicapped people, special needs people, that is not true. There's a fundamental problem here with definitions. Public schools should not be pushing any political ideology or worldview on other people's children ever. I have never done it once. I have very strong views, very strong beliefs, very strong worldviews, all of it. I have never once done that in 14 years of teaching here. The majority of citizens in Watertown don't want their money being used for social justice activism, and it's why parents are pulling their children out left and right. It's not merely the birth rate. If I may share an example, when I say the word run, we all know what it means. When I say the word run, along with the words walk, bat, ball, inning, we all know I'm talking about baseball. The words diversity, equity, inclusion, transformation, authentic, justice, words that just happen to show up together like a gang on the slide deck are also part of something bigger, and it isn't baseball. What is it? All one needs to do is look at the Panorama survey resources. Thank goodness they're gone. One of those resources that Panorama suggests to educators that offers social emotional remedies for low scoring children includes those same words. You will find them all: diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, transformation, in that resource suggested by Panorama. And do you know what else is there side by side with all of those words? Pages after pages, hundreds, filled with content such as this, and this is where the problem lies. No one is against inclusion of people that don't have the same opportunities and they have challenges. No one is against that. We all love those people. I know most of these people in this room back here. We do not have animosity toward any of these people. We truly care about them. But this is what is side by side on those pages next to diversity, equity, inclusion. Do a Google search, put all those words in at the same time. Don't just put diversity in, put them all. Because this is what you find from Panorama. Pages filled with content side by side, such as this: dismantling white supremacy, supporting youth activism. That is what has been going on. It's almost like there's a weaponization of education with
Ma'am,
other
you could
people's
finish up,
children.
please.
Yep, I'm almost done. Thank you. I submit to you that the students didn't bring politics into the boardroom. Somewhere along the line, it was allowed in the classroom and the citizens are opposing it. And we do thank the board for listening. I'm respectfully reminding you of over 2,500 people representing the no DEI CRT voters, and I have for you over 700 updated signatures and more coming from our students who want left-wing political ideologies out. We are not talking about what we've been hearing tonight. We are talking about white supremacist action, activating the youth to be activists. No, that is where this is stemming from our side. I hope you can understand why we would feel so passionate about this. We are asking you to keep our school values neutral. If you don't know what's going on with social activism and social justice activism, you need to find out what it is, research it. I'm sorry that I went so far over. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your work. I know you put a lot of work in. Here are the signatures I would like to bring up to you, please.
Thank you.
The Reverend Katie Vanderlinden from Ebenezer Moravian Church, a very proud Christian, a very proud supporter of all people. We talk about the word inclusion, we talk about the word diversity, we say they're bad words. I want the most diverse church ever. I would love for people in my church to all look different, sound different, act different, behave different. I want that wealth as part of my background. We sit here and we say we want inclusion. Well, apparently inclusion has limits. That's what the last speaker just said. Inclusion is limited to things that we choose are worthy of being included. It's okay for a kid in a wheelchair to be included, but not a kid who chooses to act or say or look different, whether it's a choice or even not a choice. That's not inclusion, that's limits. That's limits on what is acceptable. You know what? I'm a Christian, and the first person got up and talked about how Christians need to say this and Christians say that. You know what? I will call you whatever pronoun you want to be called. Because that's what respect is. I actually sat through all 4 of those strategic planning meetings. I was on the pictures today. I saw myself twice. And I know I was at all 4 because the first one, almost everybody in that room was faculty or staff or you all. And everyone was invited. And what that tells me is your faculty and your staff, they're the ones who are engaged in this. They're the ones who put in the time and effort. And what happened is little words leaked out to these folks that said, hey, you need to get there because they're talking about stuff. Well, you know what? The people who mattered were at the first one. And those people, I don't think are being heard. Because 75 to 80% of them voted in one way, and you took the words out of their mouths. And they don't get to vote because they might not live in this district. So they might not have voted you in, but they're the people that matter the most. Your students, your staff, and your faculty. It's not your taxpayers. It's not your taxpayers. I don't send my kids to public school because I'm a taxpayer. I send them because I believe in public school. I believe in a right to education, and I believe a right to education for every single kid, no matter what they look like or what they act like. And I will tell you, my kid has best friends who are of different backgrounds, and they hear those words that you talked about on the screen, that bullying, every day. You know why? Because the leaders won't stand up. The leaders in the school won't stand up and put things like diversity matters in language coming from the top. You might say inclusion will be there forever, and I hope that's true, but I also thought Roe v. Wade would as well. So until you tell me that it's in your language, until you tell me that it's what you support, our kids will keep getting bullied, because you know why? The leaders don't seem to stand up for us. Why should we stand up to it? I hope that you do better. I hope that you listen to the people who came to all 4 of those meetings. I have 4 pens. I was there. We want these words because they do matter. They matter to your faculty. They matter to your students. They matter to my daughter who refused to come tonight because she didn't want to face you all. Because she knew the words that were taken out, and she was at all 4 meetings too. So what she learned in this is that her voice didn't matter. Thanks for that education.
Hi, my name is Winter Avenel, 317 South 8th Street. First of all, I'm going to be talking about diversity. I think it's kind of ironic that we showed so much diversity by excluding taxpayers from their importance in caring about issues in the school district. I don't think that's very diverse to exclude taxpayers, average taxpayers who maybe don't have time or don't always know what's going on at school board meetings because they have jobs. All right, so I think that the mission statement's carbon neutrality when it comes to DEI is a good thing, and this is why. These words are not benign, and this is why the public cares about it. And that is why, as Linda stated, John Deere, Harley Davidson, and Tractor Supply have all jettisoned this language from their companies. I'm going to be reading something on the definition of diversity here. So, many people are figuring out that the critical social justice movement tends to use words deceptively. It tends to use words with more than one meaning, with non-standard meanings. Let's start with diversity. So the word diversity sounds like it means something everybody wants. It really does. It sounds like, oh, we're gonna have people with different backgrounds, different sorts of expertise, different perspectives. We're gonna bring them in and we're gonna, get it to be a diverse environment. But that is not specifically what diversity means within the ideology of critical social justice. Critical social justice uses the word diversity to mean commissars or apparatchiks, or in other words, people who are trained in and believe in ideology. You can read this explicitly for yourself. For example, in a diversity, equity, and inclusivity program that has since been jettisoned, that was being installed at the University of Texas at Austin, where they actually write, what they actually write is that when they're looking for people to hire under diversity, what they're looking for is people who are trained in diversity, not necessarily people who look different, have different racial or ethnic or sexual backgrounds or different disabilities. The reason that this is the case in critical social justice is that it believes that identity comes with a certain experience of life, and that certain experience of life confirms privilege or oppression. And when you live that experience, privilege or oppression, that there's an authentic understanding of that. So if you speak with that authentic so-called critical consciousness, then you have skill in diversity. But if you deny that specific definition, then you don't have an authentic expression of diversity. And so you aren't actually diverse, or you're the wrong kind of diversity or something like that. And so diversity means hiring or engaging people in your company who believe in critical social justice ideology. Otherwise, it is not considered diverse. And it doesn't matter. They might or might not happen to look like different or come from a different background. And I just want to say a second comment really quick. Riley Gaines, I saw her speak recently. She's a former collegiate swimmer who was forced to share a locker room with Leah Thomas, a biological male who chooses to represent themselves as a woman.
If you could finish up, please.
Yep, and they were allowed into the women's double NCAA swimming team in an effort to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. As testified by Riley, Thomas was described as showing signs of getting excited in the locker room. Gaines and her fellow female teammates were unable to express these concerns without repercussions, forced into silence, and that is why this language matters in the school board. This language does not only allow these situations to take place on multiple occasions in multiple different sorts of arenas, but arguably, and more importantly, it prevents women from saying anything about it when it occurs. Thank you.
All in favor? Aye.